something strange happened in the woods of Washington. In 2018, there was a mysterious and unexplained occurrence in the woods of Olympic National Park in Washington state. Both scientists and park officials have been left mystified by this event, leaving us without answers to this day. In the early hours of January 27, 2018, an unexplained force knocked down over 100 trees along the north shore of Lake Keenum. Initially, the presumed reasoning was high winds or a meteorological phenomenon of some kind. After in-depth research into the weather and forecast data, there was nothing of the sort found. The fallen trees were all facing south, and the weather forecasts showed only a light breeze coming from the east that night, making wind an impossible cause. The incident was first reported by the chief scientist of Olympic National Park, Bill Backus. Backus reached out to meteorologist and weather expert Cliff Mass for his expert opinion on this strange occurrence. Backus described the scene as massive old trees broken off at the base and displayed in a semicircle formation. Mass looked through every piece of data on meteorological occurrences for the night before, eventually noticing that the bizarre occurrence was caused by a force strong enough to trigger a localized, systemic event that was being picked up by the sensors nearest to the tree fall. The impact of the tree fall was so strong that it registered as a small earthquake in the area. Mass could still find no meteorological or weather changes or occurrences at all that could explain this event. There were no drastic temperature changes, meteor activity, and the lightning detection network showed no strikes in the area. The cause was undetermined. Mass even noted in his popular weather blog, the trees fell to the south or southeast, implying an extreme northerly wind. None of the surface locations show strong wind, and most of them are easterly or southeasterly, the wrong direction. There is no strong convection or thunderstorms, so no microbursts. Frustrating, perhaps the Sasquatch or alien visitation explanations should be taken seriously. Although some people still believe it may have been caused by a shifting of warm and cool air creating a rotor effect, others have more supernatural theories including UFOs, alien activity, and even Bigfoot. To this day, there is no determined cause of this bizarre phenomenon, and the question remains what happened in the Olympic National Park forest on January 27, 2018? Ireland's vanishing triangle. When multiple women go missing from the same general area, police immediately begin to suspect a serial maniac and start hunting for clues that might lead them to the bodies. However, the disappearances of 8 girls within an 80-mile radius of Dublin Island were so mysterious and strange, with no bodies or crime scenes ever found, that police were never able to determine what had happened to the women, causing the area to be dubbed the Vanishing Triangle, after the similarly mysterious Bermuda Triangle, due to the fact that it really appeared as though the girls had simply vanished from the face of the earth. Annie McCarrick, Eva Brennan, Imelda Keenan, Jojo Dullard, Kira Breen, Fiona Pender, Fiona Sinnott, and Deidre Jacob all went missing around Dublin between 1993 and 1998, and police were never able to find any conclusive evidence that foul play had occurred or even a rational explanation as to what had happened. Many girls disappear as they walk through busy streets, and Deidre Jacob was confirmed to have been seen mere yards from her parents' house, although she never arrived. However, there have been signs that pointed to something more menacing than a simple Bermuda Triangle phenomenon. A small wooden cross with Fiona Pender's name on it was discovered near the in 2000 date, leading some to believe that she was buried somewhere nearby. Fiona Sinnott's personal belongings were missing from her apartment and were later found in trash bags dumped in a farmer's field, as though whoever put them there wanted to create the appearance that Fiona had left intentionally. Convicted criminal Larry Murphy also lived in the vicinity of several of the girls' last known locations, but police were never able to connect him to although it is still widely thought that he had something to do with at least a few of the cases. The similarity of the cases also points to a serial maniac, as all of the women were young and mysteriously vanished, indicating that if they were abducted, that the attacker likely used the same methods. However, over 2 decades later, there have still been no clues that can help answer questions about the tragic and mysterious disappearances that left families with no closure or answers about their loved ones, and no justice for the 8 girls who were never found. Adam Clayton Lyle Jones missing at the Grand Canyon. Disappearances of people in national parks have gained notoriety ever since the Missing 411 was published. If there is one certainty, it is that at least one person a year will go mysteriously missing at any of the 419 national parks and monuments in America, although the actual annual number is estimated to be up to 1,000 missing people. There is a plethora of things that can go wrong when visiting the vast wilderness. The cruelty of nature is no joke, and many people find themselves on the losing side of a battle against survival. Many cases can merely be speculated on. And although some of these cases do eventually get solved, there's many that will remain a mystery. Though the IBS or Investigative Services branch of the law enforcement generally try to solve cases as efficiently and quickly as possible. This sadly is not always the case, and most often than not cases tend to grow cold for months or years afterwards. These cases are not closed and remain open and may become active should new evidence surface. Kathy Cupper, one of the spokespeople for the IBS, has stated it's always there on the table. Sometimes a tip will come in, someone will hear something, and it will go active again. Adam Clayton Lyle Jones is one of the unfortunate missing victims whose case has grown cold. Jones went missing on the 31st of March back in 2011 and has not been found. The man, who was only 23 at the time of his disappearance and would now be 33 years old, was last said to have been last seen by his family in the Gulf Breeze in Florida. His family claim he left home early in the afternoon in a blue Oldsmobile Delta 88, and that the only personal possession he took with him was his laptop, no other notable belongings. Little did Jones' family realize that would be the last time they would ever get to see him again. It took until the 5th of May, 2011 for a park ranger to acknowledge the abandoned Delta 88 vehicle parked at the South Rim Center of the Grand Canyon National Park. At the time, Jones had not yet been reported as a missing person, therefore not initially considered as a victim. Park rangers managed to contact Jones's parents about the abandoned car, who then proceeded to file the missing persons report to the police. Contents found within the car included an itinerary of various routes of California cities and places in Denver, Colorado. Surprisingly, there was not a mobile phone in the car, as Jones did not have his phone on him when he went missing. To this day, investigators have no idea whether he was lost or injured in the wilderness or if something else, far more morbid, might have happened. Furthermore, there is no actual evidence that he even entered the Grand Canyon Park. No photographic or witness proof that he was there apart from the car that was found in the car park. With so little to go off, investigators have had a difficult time finding any clues to Adam Jones' whereabouts. Peter Jackson missing at Yosemite National Park in 2016. An elderly man in his late 70s was reported as missing at the Yosemite National Park in California. Jackson was reported as missing in September, but his body was only found in May of the following year. His car was left at the White Wolf campground. It is speculated that Peter Jackson was following the mist trail in Yosemite Valley when he went missing. Jackson sent his son a text message on the 17th of September confirming his location, saying he was nearly at the national park. Peter Jackson, despite his advanced age, was said to have been in idyllic shape and health. Jackson was by no means an inexperienced hiker and, according to his son, would go for serious hikes averaging to up to 5 miles each on a regular basis, which just goes to show that anything can occur in the wilderness. And even the most seasoned of adventurers and hikers can find themselves as victims of a cruel fate. Investigators and those involved with the search for Jackson claim that he most likely left the White Wolf campsite for a simple hike when he disappeared, but due to unfortunate circumstances he ended up becoming lost in the wild. His camping fees were paid all the way through to the 21st of September, implying that his stay at Yosemite National Park was supposed to be a prolonged one. According to some experienced hikers who commented on the case on Reddit, the White Wolf campsite lies on top of the Tuolumne River, close to an incredibly broad canyon, with a single way down to the floor of the valley. You can easily end up falling from the side and become trapped midway down, and getting out alone would be a near impossible task to accomplish. The camping site of White Wolf is what hikers generally refer to as leave me alone campsites, as these are for hikers who wish to be left to their own devices. Many hikers claim that this area is not a place to go by yourself. Experienced hikers such as Jackson himself ought to have known this, and so the reason why he chose to go there alone is unknown. Online speculators believe that Peter Jackson might have fallen into the crevice and twisted or broken his ankle and was unable to call for help due to either losing or breaking his cell phone or having no signal. Yelling would also be ineffective, as national parks are vast and you are alone with nature. Unfortunately, his case was put on hold during those crucial days when he could have been found alive due to a lack of clues and bad weather. Whether or not we will be able to find these missing individuals or their bodies is unknown. Most missing persons cases turn cold and provide nothing fruitful for months or even years. All too often we forget that it can easily overwhelm us. One wrong turn in the woods can get us lost for months. One wrong step on the cliff can be our last. National parks are wonderful places to visit, though extreme caution must always be taken. We can only hope that the lost people will be found either way so that their families may have closure at last. Project Stargate was the discrete name given to a CIA mission aiming to develop psychic abilities, not unsimilar to those we see 11 demonstrate throughout the Stranger Things series. This highly secretive project was carried out from 1978 until it could no longer be hidden in the 1990s. Stranger Things fans paying close attention will notice that the Stargate mission covers the 1983 time span we know Stranger Things is set in. This project looked into manufacturing the supernatural and manipulating the human mind into gaining psychic abilities to be used in the military and for spying purposes. One of the biggest focuses for this project was the psychoenergetics. This is described as a mental process in which, through heightened cognitive abilities, an individual is capable of changing the characteristics of an item, usually its position, without physically interacting with or touching the object. Throughout Stranger Things, we consistently see 11, also known as Elle, move items with her mind time and time again. The researchers on Project Stargate report having had partial success with telekinesis and remote viewing. With some limited success being seen, the CIA files seem to encourage the use of these psychic abilities, but only alongside and as an informant to more concrete evidence that this is not a definitive nor accurate enough to be a standalone sole source of evidence. What has been dubbed remote viewing has earned its spot on the show too, as we see Elle tune into the conversations of the Russian spies in the series, accessing a conversation she is not physically present to hear. Stranger Things is not the first media piece to portray the Stargate project on screen, with the book and film The Men Who Stare at Goats also representing subjects being asked to look at animals in an attempt to destroy them. This film uses goats, whilst we see Elle asked to destroy a cat just by looking at it during her time in the Hawkins lab in Stranger Things. Whilst the project had ended in 1995 and information was declassified and available through National Archives, these files and documents only became accessible online as of 2017. Could there be people out there who truly have mastered the abilities we see 11 news throughout the series? Sea creatures' strange circular swimming has scientists puzzled. On March 18, 2021, a team of researchers published an article within the journal iScience detailing a bizarre event and the strange behavior observed within multiple animals living in the sea. Whilst this new research is yet to reach a definitive conclusion, unraveling the mystery truly is exciting. Amongst this circling group are green sea turtles, tiger sharks, penguins, and Antarctic fur seals. They have been swimming in the same circular motions at a consistent speed, but we are yet to find out why. Some have suggested that this could center around the navigation features that these animals have in common, namely magnetism. It was Tomoko Narasaki, a researcher from the University of Tokyo's atmosphere, and this unusual behavior in a group of green sea turtles. As part of her research, she had moved them away from their breeding ground in order to establish the patterns and trends in their navigation systems as they made their way home. Even though both Narasaki and the turtles knew where the group were heading to, the turtles that had been kitted out with GPS trackers found that they frequently paused their journey simply to swim in circles. This odd action was not only seemingly random, but actively hindered the progress on their journey. Narasaki said she had double-checked the data, ensuring she had read and interpreted it correctly, as she described the circling motion as being just like a machine. The data collected suggested that the circling increased as the animals approached coastal waters close by to where they nest. One turtle we may expect to be particularly dizzy completed 76 circles back-to-back, with each lap of the circle taking between 16 and 20 seconds to complete. Knowing how out of the ordinary this behavior is, Narasaki reported the event to several other researchers, plenty of whom reported seeing other sea creatures perform similar behaviors when monitored using the same 3D tracking tags that Narasaki had used. Despite the pattern closely resembling one another, at this time there is no reason to believe that each of these animals' new circling habits are linked, due to the broad discrepancy in when these behaviors were demonstrated. Many circled close to their feeding grounds, such as 4 tiger sharks completing 272 circles near Hawaii, whereas others have circled before courting a mate. Some suggested the circling was related to searching for food, though Antarctic fur seals completed their loops largely in the daytime, despite the majority of their eating being a nighttime event. Another difference is, as mentioned earlier, green sea turtles seemingly stop to spin midway through their travels. Whilst there is much that remains unexplained surrounding the other animals, some significant advancements have been made regarding the green sea turtles, with Narazaki explaining that this repetitive looping was usually in a navigationally important location, giving the example of them turning just before the final approach to their goal. Furthermore, it is already established that green sea turtles rely on the magnetic field as a navigation tool. They are able to assess the field from numerous directions, giving them a more informed perspective. This theory also accounts for the repetition of the action, suggesting that the same loop over and over allows for more measurements to be taken, strengthening the turtle's understanding of their whereabouts. We are yet to confirm these theories or find a general idea that can be applied to all of the spinning creatures, but this strange event has opened some new doors to some new, albeit strange, research opportunities. Annette Sayers' disappearance. On the morning of October 4, 1988, 11-year-old Annette Sayers was seen at approximately 7 a.m. standing with her dog at the school bus stop in Mount Holly, South Carolina. This was the last time that she was ever seen. When her stepfather, Steve Malinowski, returned to their home on the grounds of Mount Holly Plantation, where he worked as a caretaker, and realized that Annette had not returned from school, she was reported missing. The search of the grounds and the bus stop revealed no clues, except for a hastily penciled note that read, "Dad, Mama came back. Give the boys a hug." That was determined by handwriting experts to have indeed been written by Annette. The strangest part of the disappearance lies in the fact that Annette went missing from the same area that her mother, Karina Malinowski, went missing from almost a year earlier. Karina had reportedly left the cabin where they lived after a row with Steve. When her boss came to check on her after she did not show up for work, he found her car parked at the plantation entrance next to the bus stop. She was never seen or heard from again, and it was presumed that she took a bus and left the family. However, Annette's disappearance and note shed new light on the situation. Although no other clues were ever found, some think that Karina, knowing that Annette would be waiting at the bus stop, came and took her daughter. Although there are those that have more sinister theories. Steve and Karina were known to have frequent arguments, and it was said by one of their children that Steve battled various addictions. So some think that Karina may have lost her life as a result of a fight gone wrong, and that Annette knew that her mother had not really walked off, leaving Steve feeling as though he had no choice but to make her write the note and then take her out too. Steve was a less than tender father figure. And less than a year after Annette's disappearance, he left South Carolina and moved to Florida, giving up the 2 sons that he had with Karina for adoption. Police working the case do not believe that Annette was taken by her mother and have listed the case as a non-family abduction, continuing to exhaust all possibilities surrounding the disappearance of the young girl. Since that fateful day, police have looked into several leads. But there have been no other clues, and the case eventually went cold, leaving locals wondering whether it was simply a matter of a mother running away and then returning for her child, or if a criminal had been living among them. Swiss couple missing for 75 years found in melting Alps glacier. Marceline and Francine de Moulin were ordinary parents who had made ordinary lives for themselves in Switzerland. In 1942, they were 40 and 37 years old respectively and had made a comfortable home in the Swiss Alps with their 7 children. Marceline was a shoemaker and his wife Francine worked as a teacher at the local school. They kept several cows in a nearby meadow that Marceline took care of, as Francine was usually pregnant and was not able to clamber through the steep, snow-laden hills and valleys that made up the mountainous glacial region where they lived. However, on August 15, 1942, Francine went with Marceline on a rare trip to help milk the cows in a meadow above Chandelin in the Valais canton. It was a beautiful day and the couple were happy as they set off towards the valley. Tragically, the day ended on a much darker note when the couple did not return from their chores. Their children, family, and neighbors searched for them while the oldest sibling Monique cared for her 6 siblings. However, as days passed and there was no trace of Marceline and Francine, the children were eventually split up and raised by other family members, although they never stopped hoping that one day their parents might be found. "We spent our whole lives looking for them without stopping. We thought that we could give them the funeral they deserved one day," said their youngest daughter. Yet the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into years, and after decades, hope was all but lost. Yet in 2017, 75 years after that fateful day, 2 bodies were discovered frozen 8,600 feet up in the San Florent Glacier by a worker performing maintenance on a ski lift above the La Diablerie resort. The bodies were lying extremely near each other and had been so perfectly preserved in the glacier through the years that their 1940s-era clothes were easily distinguishable. Many of their possessions were also found nearby in a similarly preserved state, including their clothes, hiking boots, a hat, backpacks, a bottle, a book, and a watch. The police were notified and a helicopter arrived to remove the entire block of ice surrounding the remains, so that they could be removed without any destruction to the preserved bodies. DNA tests were performed that immediately confirmed what was already suspected. The bodies in the glacier were those of Marcelin and Francine Dumoulin. Those in charge of excavating and examining the bodies for burial suspect that the unfortunate couple likely fell while climbing the treacherous glacial terrain and slipped into a crevasse where their bodies were frozen for decades in the cold, dry conditions of the Alps. The Sandflaren Glacier where the bodies were found is currently receding at a rate of about 1 meter to 1.5 meters per year due to the warmer weather. And this rapid shrinking finally uncovered the bodies that had been lying beneath the hard-packed ice for 3/4 of a century, solving a cold case that had long been given up on. The Dumoulin case is not the first one to have been solved by global warming either. 280 people have gone into the Alps and never returned, and as the ice shelf begins to shrink, some of these bodies have been able to be recovered after decades. As for the Dumoulins, their remaining children are relieved to finally have some answers. I can say that after 75 years of waiting, this news gives me a deep sense of calm. For the funeral, I will not wear black. I think that white would be more appropriate. It represents hope, which I never lost. Reports their youngest daughter now in her 80s, and at long last she can finally have some closure. Battle of Los Angeles. More commonly known and referred to by its nickname, the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, was an incident in 1942 that led people to believe in a massive unidentified flying object sighting over the city of Los Angeles. Tensions during this time had already been heightened following the Japanese Imperial Navy's attack on Pearl Harbor, and so stationed anti-air military officials were on hair-trigger alert throughout the night. At approximately the air raid sirens sounded throughout Los Angeles County after officials and radar control towers spotted several unidentified aircraft floating through the night sky. At 3:15 a.m., the anti-air rounds were firing into the sky with 0.50 caliber machine guns and 12.8-pound anti-aircraft shells. Witness reports stated that a large cigar-shaped object was floating through the sky and appeared to be completely unaffected by these shells, as a total of 1,400 cannonball-sized rounds were fired at its underbelly. The result of the incident would end with damaged buildings, destroyed vehicles, and 5 civilians, of whom had died as an indirect result of the ongoing chaos. No aircraft was ever recovered, and the entire incident was attempted to have been covered up by the United States Air Force over the following days. Today, the incident is still regarded as a mystery, and experts have suggested that it could have been due to a floating weather balloon in the region that could have caused mounted tensions to have climaxed and led to this full-scale retaliation from the United States military forces. Other witness reports directly contradict this finding, however, claiming that the main cause was due to extraterrestrial involvement and the spotting of unidentified craft in the night sky. Whatever the true cause could have been still led to the incident and is regarded with high levels of scrutiny by the UFOologist community as key evidence of extraterrestrial life. The Temple of Angkor Wat was bounded by a mysterious structure 1.5 kilometers long. In December of 2015, it was discovered that the world's largest religious monument is actually even bigger than we once thought, among other brilliant insights provided by this research team. The Temple of Angkor Wat, located in Cambodia, Southeast Asia, has been thought of as the world's largest religious monument for hundreds of years, having been built in the 12th century. Once at the heart of the Khmer Empire. Bringing a modern twist to this knowledge, however, is the work of a team of Australian archaeologists who have found we can actually expand the recorded size of the temple thanks to their use of ground-penetrating radar whilst investigating the Angkor Wat complex. The research mission, dubbed the Greater Angkor Project, was led by Australian researchers Professor Roland Fletcher and Dr. Damien Evans, who work with the University of Sydney. Their investigation revealed more components to the temple than we had previously known of, as well as the complex being bounded on the south side by a large structure, adding to the previously recorded size of this record-holding temple. When speaking on behalf of the team, Professor Fletcher said the structure, which has dimensions of more than 1,500 meters by 600 meters, is the most striking discovery associated with Angkor Wat to date. Despite this being a fascinating finding, there is still plenty we are yet to uncover. To date, the purpose and function of the structure remains unknown, and we are yet to find a parallel or otherwise similar structure in any other Angkorian works. Aside from the large adjoined structure, the team also discovered buried towers that had been assembled and removed throughout the period estimated to encompass the dates surrounding the construction and first uses of the temple. At the Angkor Wat site, even more new information has come to light as a result of this investigation, challenging the misconceptions surrounding the temple. For decades, centuries even, we had held the assumption that on the land neighboring Angkor Wat stood similarly sacred precincts and cities of religious importance. However, this team has found there to be evidence of a sparse population's housing among these areas. The research team believed this could suggest residential use of the land, theories supported by the findings of roads, ponds, and mounds. Current speculation says that these were all used by people working within the temple in positions of service, largely such as priests. Another fascinating revelation made courtesy of this project is the discovery of wooden structures having been created to secure and strengthen Angkor Wat. Archaeologists predict that these wooden structures have been implemented towards the more modern end of the temple's history, leading Dr. Fletcher to describe it as a possible last attempt at defense, an opinion expressed through his statement. Angkor Wat is the first and only known example of an Angkorian temple being systematically modified for use in a defensive capacity. The placement of these defenses on a more modern timeline estimated between 1297 and 1585 AD suggests that the addition of the defenses could have been in an effort to resist the growing influence of the city Ayutthaya, a city nearby. Dr. Fletcher summarized with the concluding thoughts, either data makes the defenses of Angkor Wat one of the last major constructions at Angkor and is perhaps indicative of its end. This relatively recent insight into a temple so long out of use points to both the complexity of human civilization and the momentous discoveries that continue to lie ahead of us. And the abundance of new leads and information to have come from one research team is a true testament to their important work. The firefighter and the ghost from the native Indians who settled on the plains to the unstoppable machine that was westward expansion, states such as Indiana have a rich history. Whilst aesthetically stunning, some consider Indiana rightly or wrongly to be a little, well, forgotten. Although this assumption is not exactly true, something that is undisputable is that the state has had its fair share of terrifying supernatural encounters. Is based on folklore, and in the town of Gary, a belief in the paranormal perhaps now runs a little deeper after a spine-chilling event that took place in 2015. An abandoned and dilapidated town, Gary's population is small and crime rates are high. As such, old buildings are prone to setting ablaze and the city's fire brigade are often busy. But one call out to battle a small wooden shack that had caught fire was one that they will likely never forget. After taking a few photographs of the blaze for training purposes before posting the pictures on Facebook, the firefighter's family spotted something strange in the window of the fiery abode. Standing in the flames was the horrifying figure of a man dressed in black. The bizarre thing was that the house was known to be long empty and the firefighters had not heard any signs of distress coming from the building as they put out the fire. As such, residents of Gary came to the only conclusion that they thought fitted the strange event, that the malevolent man in black could only be something from another world, namely a ghost or spirit of some sort. Of course, this cannot be verified, but in a town that has been largely abandoned, even the strangest things are not out of the realms of possibility. American Airlines reports UFO while flying over New Mexico. Tall claims of UFO sightings are nothing new, especially across the American continent. For decades, there have been alleged alien sightings and die-hard believers in extraterrestrial visitors coming to Earth. Recently, an American Airlines pilot has been recorded declaring that they spotted a UFO during a Sunday flight over New Mexico from Cincinnati to Phoenix, Arizona. Also occurred around the New Mexico area, which leaves further room for debate and speculation over whether the area is a hotspot for UFO and extraterrestrial activity. Records show that the pilot of American Airlines Flight 2292 contacted the Federal Aviation Administration traffic controllers to ask them whether or not they had any targets up here. He explains he vividly witnessed something flying right over the plane. He said, "I hate to admit this, but it looked like a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast right over the top of us. By all definitions, this classifies as a UFO, an identified flying object." Of course, it is important to note that a UFO does not necessarily link to alien life forms, despite the vehement association between the two. For all intents and purposes, a UFO can also be a man-made weaponized plane, missile, or military object from another country potentially used for the purposes of spying. A man by the name of Steve Douglas recorded the transmission between pilot and traffic controllers, and it has since been confirmed as a genuine recorded transmission by American Airlines themselves, with them stating, "Following a debrief with our flight crew and additional information received, we can confirm this radio transmission was from American Airlines Flight 2292 on February 21st. The FBI has also been involved, stating that they are aware of the reported incident. While FBI policy is to neither confirm nor deny investigations, the FBI works continuously with federal, state, local, and tribal partners to share intelligence and protect the public. This official response has caused suspicion in conspiracy and alien-believing circles online." Steve Douglas is an aircraft enthusiast and has written a book about military aircraft called The Comprehensive Guide to Military Monitoring. Douglas claims that through his research there was no sign of any possible man-made military vessel in the skies that day, and that if there had been, its presence would have been noted on the automatic dependent surveillance broadcast log. Lally Laxbergs, one of the spokespeople for the Kirkland Air Force Base, has spoken up about the alleged UFO sightings, denying all and any knowledge of such an occurrence, stating with vehement certainty that no such thing happened. Alas, many alien and UFO believers are convinced that the claims are genuine, and they see New Mexico as a staple of UFO happenings ever since Roswell. Online, many UFO enthusiasts have taken the time to state their views of it being covered up by the FBI and air bases. Douglas especially is not convinced. He even claims to have discussed the occurrence with an ex-member of the military air program who explained that in order for the pilot to have seen any object like the kind he described, it would have needed to be practically heading straight at him. The question posed by Steve Douglas was simple. If the military can't explain what it is, what's flying out there that we don't know about? Mystery ancestor mated with ancient humans. The desire of Homo sapiens to mate with their archaic relatives has long preoccupied researchers. Now scientists have discovered evidence of a previously unknown human species in the genome of West Africans. Modern man, Homo sapiens, mated with Neanderthals in Europe and fathered children. This is well known. Now a study in the journal Science Advances shows that fertile exchanges also took place in Africa between Homo sapiens and an archaic human species. Fossilized bones do not exist of this apparently irresistible human relative. Instead, geneticists of the University of California discovered traces of the previously unknown prehistoric human in the genomes of present-day West Africans. The researchers refer to this as a ghost population. The discovery provides new clues to the genetic diversity of the genus Homo in Africa, which could previously only be reconstructed in fragments from fossils. The geneticists discovered the clues to the new human species during a genetic analysis. They compared the DNA of West Africans with that of Neanderthals and so-called Denisovan humans, another species closely related to Neanderthals. Genetic traces of both prehistoric humans are found in the genome of every modern human. In the genome of some West Africans, however, scientists have now discovered additional previously unknown genetic snippets that they have assigned to the new, unknown relative. The modeling of the geneticists shows that the ways of the modern human being and the spirit relative initially separated about 1 million years ago in Africa. About 50,000 years ago, however, the two unequal partners met again. Researchers are still puzzling over whether the genetic traces point to a known archaic human species or actually belong to a new species. 1 million years ago, Homo erectus lived in Africa, presumably the first human species that used fire and could walk like a modern human. Did the ghost species resemble that prehistoric fellow? In the late 1960s, archaeologists in Nigeria found the so-called Iwo Ilara skull and dated it to be about 11,200 years old. The geneticists suspect that this human skull could have belonged to a representative of their spirit species. Dogs found roaming around near an old plant in Russia. A rather strange piece of news emerged in February of 2021 that a group of blue dogs were spotted near a closed-down chemical plant in Russia. The factory had been out of production for 6 years, yet the past few months it has quickly gained a reputation for the seemingly strange appearance of blue dogs near it. Apparently, these colorful canines have been around almost since the closure of the factory, though the pack seemed to have piqued the interest of the media a little more recently following the emergence of a photograph online. It was Alexei Ganin who first posted the image capturing the blue pups that has sparked recent conversations. He shared his photo on VK, a Russian social media site. As you might expect, his post received mixed responses from speculation to humor to concern. One user laughed about Smurfs whilst others shot down any attempts at humor arising from the scenario, expressing concern for the well-being of man's apparently now blue best friend. Of course, in the true fashion of the internet, the demand for answers soon arose and the quest to find them began. Many have deemed it likely that the dogs were exposed to chemical residue rolling in copper sulfate, which is renowned for its blue pigmentation and is known to have been used in the factory's production. This theory is also the message being presented by Andrei Miselwich. He, the manager of the plant, agreed with the chemical residue suggestion, mentioning the plausible outcome of homeless dogs having made it into one of the buildings and rolling in it once they had stumbled across chemical residue such as the copper sulfate. The thought on the mind of many is, are the dogs going to be okay? Well, Miselwich thwarted the responsibility of the dogs from the company, denying any necessity for the chemical plant ensure side effects are treated and the dogs return to their regular dog colors once again. He stated they cannot bear the costs of capturing homeless animals and their sterilization. Despite the source of the issue not clamoring to find a solution, the city itself has taken an active role aiding the blue dogs. However, this follows public reassurance that the safety of the dogs is not at risk as their chemicals most likely are not posing a threat. When commenting on the issue, city officials said the following. According to preliminary visual inspection, the dogs are in a satisfactory condition. Their spokesperson continued to explain that the next steps in their course of action is to enter the factory, locate the affected animals and examine both the dogs and the substance. Despite the reassurance from the city, many were skeptical regarding the claim that the dogs were perfectly healthy. One example of an animal rights activist speaking out against this issue is the Humane Society International Vice President of Companion Animals, Kelly O'Mara, who referred to this unnatural coloring scenario as an obvious welfare issue. As she elaborates, O'Mara highlights that due to the implied close proximity, contact, or possible ingestion of these chemicals, there could very well be need for veterinary intervention without which there is risk of skin irritations, internal bleeding, or death. Despite the uproar as to this revelation, this is unfortunately not the first time nor the first place we are seeing dogs with dyed fur. Other instances include blue dogs in India, a color change credited to the illegal depositing of waste into the Kasadi River, and even green dogs reported near to Moscow. And though this was quickly deemed to have been non-toxic paint, subjecting dogs to these substances is highly unnecessary. So far, we're yet to discover exactly why these dogs turned blue, though treatment plans at the vets are proving to be promising for the health of these pups. Giving this bizarre story a fairy tale ending, 2 of the dyed dogs found themselves a home. As their blue tinge wears away, they will be left with loving families. Roald Amundsen. Roald Amundsen was a polar explorer during the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. He played a crucial role in the exploration of polar zones and was extremely successful until his disappearance. He was born into a family of ship owners to Jens Amundsen and Hannes Farquist. The family was sizable, with him being their 4th son. At 15, he read Sir John Franklin's narrative of polar expeditions, which shaped his entire future. Hannah, his mother, encouraged him to pursue the stable vocation of doctorhood, hoping that he would not follow the family tradition of becoming a sailor or trader at sea. For her sake, Roald agreed and attended university for a short amount of time until his mother passed away. Immediately, he dropped out of his studies to begin a new exciting life on the waves, joining the Belgian Antarctic expedition as first mate. Adrien de Galaschi led this expedition on the RV Belgica. The journey ended terribly as the Belgica got stuck in ice glaciers off the coast of Alexander Island, west of the Antarctic. The crew were subsequently unprepared for the winter which followed. Due to his medical knowledge, Roald Amundsen estimated that the American named Frederick Cook had likely saved them all from scurvy by hunting for animals and giving the crew the meat. When one cannot obtain citrus fruits, fresh meat from animals who produce their own vitamin C usually has just enough of it to prevent the horrid disease. This was a realization he would carry with him for the rest of his career. In 1903, Amundsen led the first expedition to traverse Canada's Northwest Passage. He took 6 men with him in a vessel named Joer, which had a small and shallow draft. The ship had a small 13-horsepower paraffin engine. The crew spent 2 winters at King William Island, where Amundsen learned about Arctic survival from the local Netsilik Inuit population. Alongside this, he learned how to sledge dogs and use animal skins for warmth. The Zua cleared the Canadian Arctic archipelago on the 17th of August, 1905, having to make a stop for the winter before journeying on to the Pacific coast. The nearest telegraph station was 800 kilometers away. Amundsen succeeded in wiring a message in December and went on to Nome in 1906. He was initiated into the American Antiquarian Society. During this time, he learned he had a new king, Håkon VII, after the dissolution of Norway and Sweden's union. He sent him news of his successes and proclaimed his achievement of traversing the Northwest Passage to be a great achievement for Norway. The crew returned to Oslo in 1906. After almost 4 years. In 1909, Amundsen craved more adventure, alerting his crew that they would be heading to Antarctica, planning on exploring the Arctic basin, though he found it extremely difficult to raise the necessary funds. Regardless, he set out for the south in 1910. Amundsen and his men reached the Great Ice Barrier and set up camp called Framheim. For a while they fared well in the freezing temperatures, with Amundsen using past experiences and Inuit knowledge to their advantage. They set out to reach the direct South Pole in October and achieved claiming the icy pole, naming their southern base Polheim and renaming the Antarctic plateau King Håkon VII's Plateau, and managed to safely return back to Framheim. His planning and skillful tactics were crucial in their accomplishment. In 1918, he set out on another expedition in a new ship, moored, which lasted until 1925. He wished to explore the smaller, undiscovered areas of the Arctic Ocean. Amundsen wanted to freeze the moored into the ice caps, and this indeed happened, but too well, and they became heavily trapped. This occurred multiple times, and they spent 2 winters frozen in ice. Amundsen broke his arm during this time and was attacked by polar bears and was of little assistance to his own men when hunting or slaying. The crew returned to Nome to fix the ship, but Amundsen's men abandoned him, furious that they had not achieved what they set out to do. Sometime afterwards, he ended up adopting 2 indigenous girls, 4-year-old Kakanita and Camilla. But 2 years later, he lost all his finances, sending the girls to stay with Camilla's father in eastern Russia. In 1923, he attempted to fly over the pole. Amundsen's aircraft was damaged and the journey had to be abandoned. In 1925, he accompanied Lincoln Ellsworth, taking a flying boat to go over to the north, but like the previous aircraft, got too damaged to complete the travel. In 1926, Amundsen and 15 other men managed to cross the Arctic in their airship. After an extraordinary career and successful life, mysteriously disappeared on the 18th of June, 1928, whilst flying over the Arctic on a rescue mission. Amundsen's flying boat never returned and he was never seen again, yet his legacy eternally remains. Google Earth user spots a 400-foot ice ship off the coast of Antarctica. Google Earth is a fantastic tool that almost everyone has played around with at some point, but one particular user of the app found what they claim to be a 400-foot ice ship trapped in an iceberg about 100 miles off the coast of the freezing continent. The impressive ice formation is said to have an uncanny similarity to a cruise ship, with lines of windows and hosts of chimneys. Immediately after the Google Earth user posted their findings, the discovery blew up online in conspiracy circles, with all sorts of theories arising as to what the large glacial object could be and how it got there. Many of those involved with the theorizing declared their belief that there is something either stuck or secretly hidden away from our sight in the continent. Things ranging from it being a secluded 1940s bunker to some long-gone civilization which, for one reason or another, disappeared. YouTube user Mr. MBB333 was the first to share the images on the platform and is a self-proclaimed Earth Watchman. Furthermore, he has allegedly been using Google Earth for the entire past decade, observing the globe, its reactions to space weather, and how the Earth's inner mechanics work. Mr. MBB333 claims to monitor the entire Earth, from seabed to the mountains to space and everything around us. The video in question reveals a huge block of ice amongst a snowy white background from the basic view, but when he switches to an in-depth 3D screen, the block of ice transforms, forming the shape of a ship which he measured out in estimates to be 4,000 feet in length. It looks like a random iceberg to the onlooker, but part of it looks like it's built with purpose, like an entryway. It does not look random as if it had a purpose. He states also pointing out the symmetrical features which he believes must have been created, not naturally formed, as certain aspects of it have crisp 90-degree angles. The video has more than 46,000 views and sparked a heavy conversation down in the comments section regarding the phenomenon. Someone in the comments claimed that it is likely something that remained from the Arctic explorations. Another commenter argued that it must be a vehicle of sorts, hidden under the ice and concealed from common sight as a bunker for the elite should a global catastrophe occur. A particular user believes that the wealthy have been going out there for about 80 years and refused to tell the public of its existence until now. Another person stated that they believe that ships are built underground, also to save the powerful elite 1% population like in the movie 2012. Many viewers of the video felt rage at the thought of astronauts, politicians, religious leaders, and the rich having an elusive escape plan should a world-shattering disaster take out the majority of the common population. The most common theory, though, was that more investigations should be done on the continent as there might have been a secret never before known about civilization. One other person commented, much more attention needs to be given to this continent. It wasn't always frozen. Whether there is any real truth to the claims or whether any of these theories are true, we cannot know for certain. Speculation is the best we can do until more research or investigation is done into the matter. The Jabafofi spider. The Jabafofi, more commonly known as the Congolese giant spider, is that of a large undiscovered species of spider that is reportedly the size of a man and having survived from larger arachnid species found in ancient prehistoric times well into the modern day. Though larger spiders have been reported all across the continent of Africa, it appears that within the Congo there are native tribes known as the Baka that refer to the spider as the Jabafofi, and have a reported leg span of roughly 4 feet long. This was uncovered after a number of African reports began telling of a massive spider infesting different African countries at different times of the year. The reported sightings of such a creature occurred back in the 1890s when a missionary from England ventured into the country of Uganda and discovered a massive web located near Lake Nyasa. He then writes that as they were looking at the web and getting close to try to understand what it was given its massive size, stretching between 2 larger standing trees, several of his ports became trapped. As they began to move in the webs, sticking to the strings, they claimed spiders with legs longer than 4 feet began to come out and bite into the men. Later expeditions in 1938 would lead researchers to consulting with local and native tribes in the Congo that told of the Jabafofi spider that was believed to have a matching leg span of 4 feet in length, had thousands of eggs described as being the size of peanuts, and would nest nearby villages in efforts to trap birds, large animals, and even humans. NASA's TESS spacecraft has spotted 2,200 new worlds. NASA almost always appears to be at the forefront of space exploration, and TESS has been another successful space mission, giving us more information about what lies beyond our planet. TESS, the Transiting Exoplanet Survey satellite, left us here on Earth in the April of 2018 to embark upon a 2-year space mission scanning the cosmos for potential planets that lie not too far away. On a monthly basis, this spacecraft made its way to a new set of stars, positioning itself to let us observe the skies. Astronomers back on Earth eagerly awaited the results from TESS as the satellite would scan, searching for a distinctive lowering in brightness of a star. This would indicate that a planet had passed in between a star and TESS. After just 2 years up in space, TESS reportedly discovered 2,241 potential new exoplanets. Scientists will study these candidates and determine whether or not they truly can be classed as exoplanets, alongside numerous other profiles and views of these planets that will appear in a catalog. Natalia Guerrero, an MIT researcher and lead author on the research paper, said, "The exciting thing is to look at the map of TESS exoplanets as a kind of to-do list with 2,000 things on it. Whilst this positive attitude is exciting, a 2,000-item-long jobs list is certainly a long one. Where to start? The initial action taken in the creation of the catalog is the long-winded task of sifting through the observations. Scientists have had to pour through 16,000 targets to decipher which alerts from tests were planets and which were other outer space phenomena. This revealed a possible 2,241 planets. This results in a whopping number of candidate planets to be explored further or put on Guerrero's to-do list, all of which have the potential to host alien life forms. The next step in this large-scale research was to run tests that aim to narrow down false positives, further filtering data that could be an indication of a different event in space or celestial body as opposed to an exoplanet. This eliminated 500 of the candidate planets, proving to have been a valuable exercise. The following actions more closely reflect the already established procedures, dubbing the candidates' planets objects of interest and conducting a series of tests to confirm the planetary status of these newly discovered possible planetary bodies. This procedure is known as confirming the planet, to ensure they meet the minimum requirements to be considered a planet. As of yet, 120 of TESS's candidate planets in the catalog have been determined to be planets. Not due to a high dismissal rate, but rather due to the inaccessibility of often occupied equipment. This catalog will contribute to the research for decades to come. The vast number of candidate planets to explore followed by the confirmed planets gives a goldmine of possible research that can be conducted. Despite a huge range of research to undertake, some planets have prompted more exciting suggestions than others, stealing the spotlight, or rather the starlight, as a series of firsts have been carried out in this unique space exploration. Pymancy C is described as a subneptune with a thick atmosphere and was the first planetary discovery of TESS. TI 700d is the first planet identified by TESS that is both a comparable and approximately similar size to Earth and orbits in a habitable zone of the star within its solar system, making it a strong contender for a planet that may contain alien life. Then there are other notable discoveries which are independently astonishing regardless as to implications for alternate life forms. Be 6 times larger than Earth, though only 45 million years old, relatively young for a planet of this scale. Furthermore, LHS 3844b can complete an entire orbit of its star within 11 hours, a much shorter year than ours here on Earth. However, despite this interesting find, it is unlikely anything more than a rock in space will be uncovered here. TESS has plans to continue exploring for another 2 years, leaving scientists the job of connecting the dots, according to Guerrero. As more discoveries are made, researchers keep changing their mind on how big Megalodon was. The prehistoric Megalodon was the massive great-grandfather of the sharks that lurk among beaches today. Researchers studying fossilized skeletons of the Megalodon agreed that it was undoubtedly one of the largest shark species to ever roam the ocean. However, they were previously unable to agree upon exactly how large this creature was until a recent study answered these questions once and for all. The massive beast lived from around 23 million years ago until 3 million years ago, and fossilized remains of its teeth, which are as large as human hands, have finally cracked the code in allowing scientists to definitively estimate the truly massive proportions of the Megalodon. Sharks' multiple rows of teeth mean that they frequently shed them, sometimes as often as once a week, and the next tooth in the row moves forward to take its place. Since the teeth grow proportionately with the shark, and on average a shark will lose 2,000 teeth in its lifetime. Paleontologists at the University of Bristol and Swansea University were able to take rare fossilized Megalodon teeth and compare them with teeth of modern-day species to chart a growth curve for the ancient beast. The growth curve generated mathematical calculations which were used to determine the previously undetermined proportions of the Megalodon, and these proportions were mammoth indeed. The shark would have reached adult size at around 18 meters, with a tail length of an average of 4 meters and weighing upwards of 48 tons. Clocking in at more than twice the size of a modern-day great white shark, the Megalodon is by far the largest shark species to have existed. Its dorsal fin alone would have been as tall as the average adult male, and the bite force behind those multiple rows of teeth was estimated to be over 10 tons of only 2 tons. Serrated bite marks on the fossilized bones of animals and fortunate enough to be preyed to the Megalodon act as a testament to the incredible strength of those jaws. The Megalodon, meaning giant tooth, is aptly named, with teeth over 3 times the size of the great white shark, which is its closest modern-day relative. There is no doubt that those massive jaws ruled the sea in its time. The mystery of the seabird ship. The mythical seabird was a ghost ship found near the Newport harbor of Rhode Island in the year 1750. Those who spotted the ship went to investigate it after the ship beached itself on Easton's Beach, but there wasn't any sign of life. The cargo remained, and, according to legend, there was a kettle boiling on the stove in the ship's kitchens with a breakfast set out on the table untouched. Not a single thing had seemingly gone wrong. There was no trace of sickness, robbery, sea kidnapping, or violence. The belongings of the sailors were still on the seabird and there was no sign of any rush or conflict, though one longboat was found missing, which suggested that the crew abandoned the ship in a fit of sudden panic. Folklore dictates that the captain was seen on the seabird's deck by nearby sailors, seemingly calm and steady mere hours prior to the ship's mysterious discovery. No one had any clue what might have happened and why the crew took the lifeboat and fled, though it's not known if that happened. As with all ghost ship theories, mutiny is always considered. The legend goes on to say that after the seabird's cargo was taken off the ship by those who found it, the seabird itself faded into obscurity. Historic accounts debate this, with many era-appropriate sources claiming that what had actually happened is that the seabird was sold to a merchant who proceeded to change the seabird's name, most likely to cleanse the ship's unsolved tragedy and to give it a new slate from being recognized as the ghost ship. This was in fear that no one would purchase a cursed ship. Regardless, neither the crew itself nor the seabird were ever seen again. It's as if they faded into the morning mist. Local claims of apparitions and ghosts continued, however, and the folklore ensured the legend would live on generations down the line. In fact, it actually went on to inspire authors and works of fiction, with the story being published in a Boston newspaper in 1885, allegedly being inspired by the legend of the seabird. The story was based around mutiny. In the past, ghostly tales and claims of unsolved mysteries were far more abundant and, in many ways, far more whimsical than they are today. We have got logic and science to prove against mythical beliefs of apparitions, but one cannot help but wonder whether there is truth in those claims. After all, myths of ghosts and spirits have spread all over the world for as long as humans have existed. Nowadays, we can explain some of these ghost ships using theories and logic, yet there's still some that remain a mystery. The Holy Face of Genoa. Throughout history, there have been many relics and paintings that are claimed to have the accurate image of Christ's face. But historians and even the most religious people take these claims with a pinch of salt. However, there is one remarkable ancient relic that has been described as the oldest portrait of Christ. Most people believe it to be the most accurate and authentic portrait of Jesus Christ. This portrait is today present in the Church of St. Bartholomew of the Armenians in the town of Genoa in Italy. There is a popular ancient legend about the creation of the Holy Face of Genoa. It is believed that King Abgar of Odessa in Armenia was sick with leprosy when he heard about the miraculous healing powers of Jesus. At that time, Jesus was in Palestine. Unable to travel himself, the king sent an artist named Ananias to meet Jesus and paint a portrait of his face. However, upon reaching Jerusalem, the artist failed at his attempts to portray Jesus accurately. This is when Jesus took the canvas and rested it on his face that was covered with sweat. As a result, an image of the face of Jesus was printed on the canvas. Ananias returned to Armenia with the image and touched the king with the canvas. The king was miraculously healed from leprosy. Since that day, the shroud has been worshipped as a sacred relic. The canvas with the portrait of Jesus has since been kept in a silver gilt frame that was made during the 14th century. The Beast of Bodmin Moor. Back in early 1995, the British government received more than 60 reported incidents taken from locals of Bodmin Moor, of which reported that the residents were encountering a large black panther-like creature with scraggly furs, a large powerful jaw, the muscled body of a big cat more than 4 feet long, and black furs, making it nearly impossible to see at night until the creature is close enough to attack. This led to the government starting an official investigation into the area of Bodmin Moor to try to better understand the existence of the creature and whether or not it posed a threat to the residents. Shortly after the investigation began, a skull of a leopard was found on the banks of the nearby river known as Fowey, and many began to speculate that perhaps there was a never-before-seen local species of large cat in the region. These creatures were then quickly given the name the Beast of Bodmin Moor, which led many experts quickly trying to assess the situation and better understand how a leopard could have arrived in the region. Many theories and myths have started that a rich private collector could have been illegally importing the creatures that soon found themselves freed throughout the region. A theory that would explain quite reasonably how the beast came to be and why it would be in open areas of Bodmin Moor. Others believe that the Beast of Bodmin Moor is a direct descendant of the native wildcat species that was believed to have gone completely extinct in Britain more than 100 years ago, but is now making a comeback. Outside of the 60 direct reports of the creature, there have been other reports of leopard calls, hissing, growling, mutilations of livestock, and even missing pets that have been found half-eaten no more than a few days later. The haunted Resurrection Cemetery. A city cemetery. Resurrection Cemetery in southwest Chicago, Illinois is bordered by ordinary suburban housing, some forestry in the north of the cemetery and beyond that mostly warehouses. Resurrection isn't the most spectacular cemetery that you'll ever lay your eyes upon, and its flat, non-protruding landscape is a testament to this. However, the events and legends surrounding Resurrection Cemetery are not so plain. The legend for which the cemetery is famous for is that of the Resurrection Mary. A variation of vanishing hitchhiker folklore, the legend of the Resurrection Mary is one that wouldn't look out of place in Hollywood. It developed in the 30s, a time of growth and repair yet also poverty and angst in America, and plays on very American horror ideals. Yet for some, the Resurrection Mary is as real as ghost stories get, but who or what actually is the Resurrection Mary? The tale originates from a leisurely ballroom dance that took place one evening in 1934 at O. Henry Ballroom on Arger Avenue, the same road that Resurrection Cemetery is situated on. 20-year-old Mary Bregovy had been dancing with her boyfriend deep into the evening, as was common in the 30s. However, as can sometimes happen, the evening turned sour. At some point during the ordeal, Mary and her boyfriend got into a row and she stormed ballroom. Upset, confused, and most definitely not in a state of complete mental clarity at that point, Mary fatefully stepped out into the road where she was hit by a car, which resulted in her passing away. Mary was buried in the adjacent Resurrection Cemetery in her favorite white gown, and that was thought to be the sorry end to a tragic event. In 1939, a man named Jerry Pallas stopped to pick up a young female hitchhiker by the he noted that she was strangely quiet but very attractive and wearing a pretty white dress. Jerry then asked the girl to dance with him at the ballroom on the same road. Once the evening was over, Jerry offered to drive the girl home. She lived on the other side of town, but they had only driven a few hundred feet down the road when she asked him to stop the car. She got out at the cemetery, thanked Jerry for the ride, and then simply vanished. Jerry drove onto the address that the girl had originally given him to drop her off at. There, he spoke with the girl's mother and explained the events of that evening. But more than anything, the mother seemed confused. And then she said to Jerry, "My daughter passed away 5 years ago." Some years later, Jerry spoke out about the bizarre events of that evening, saying, "It was then that I understood why the woman I was dancing with that night was ice cold to the touch. I had worked in a funeral home for a while, and it was the touch of a corpse." It was some years later until the next story of the ghostly girl in white made the news. Throughout the 80s, police officers, tourists, and locals all spoke of strange experiences they had on Archer Avenue by the cemetery gates late at night. As a matter of fact, many of the stories of Resurrection Mary came from level-headed of mental illness. That only makes it all the more creepier. The New Orleans School Haunting. The existence of paranormal activity has been a hotly contested subject for centuries. For a select few, its reality is undisputed, but for others, it is simply stuff of the silver screen. However, rest assured that what you are about to hear cannot be slandered by science. The events of our second story defy the laws of logic and so can only be explained by one thing: ghosts. In late August of 2005, Hurricane Katrina was ravaging the deep south of America. From Miami to New Orleans, the storm left a visible impression on the area with upturned homes and trees felled for miles. New Orleans was by far the worst-hit city on Katrina's path of destruction. Nearly 80% of the city had to evacuate to avoid Mother Nature's ensuing onslaught. However, it is believed that the storm left more than just its physical mark, one a little more chilling. Amidst the raging storm, the Sophie B. Wright School, named after an avid educational philanthropist, was evacuated but also served as living quarters for some members of the National Guard who were involved in the cleanup and rescue operation. If the Guard's initial task of dealing with the fallout of one of America's most devastating recent natural disasters was not difficult enough, their experiences at the school were by no means a light relief. Many of the guards stationed at the school reported harrowing tales of transcendental activity such as unexplained shadows and noises. But what perhaps is the most chilling of such activity was the fierce spirit of a little girl who managed to terrorize seasoned soldiers who had fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. One guard reported that whilst opening a closet of cleaning supplies, he saw the strange little girl and heard her giggling. Another guard even came face to face with a shadow whilst using the restroom, promptly causing him to flee. Events such as the aforementioned were widespread. For the guards, enough was enough, and a chaplain was called in to perform an exorcism on the school to wave away any spirits. After the visit, it seemed to be the end of the reign of the supernatural at the school, and life went back to normal. Many believe that Hurricane Katrina was an act of God to serve as punishment for humanity. As such, it also reignited the spirits of the past for further retribution. Whilst the exorcism may have ended the hauntings in this case, the possibility that such spirits still dwell in the school exists, as well as elsewhere in New Orleans, one of America's most haunted cities. Monte Cristo Historic Homestead. Another haunted home based upon a tragedy is the Monte Cristo built in Australia. The original homeowner and builder of this home was one Christopher Crawley, though the tragic tale really commences when his wife Elizabeth took over the home in 1910 upon her husband's death. Grief-stricken at the loss of her husband, Elizabeth spent the remainder of her life within the walls of the house, leaving only twice before her death. She converted the box room into a chapel and became highly religious, turning to the Bible for comfort and support. Elizabeth was tied so closely to her home, believed to have just left twice before her death due to a burst appendix, that many think she stays there still today, as her ghost is now said to haunt the building. The death and haunting of Elizabeth Crawley appears to have been a catalyst to supernatural activity, unexplained noises and orbs, as well as phantom-like sounds. The events that have followed the initial death include the violent death of a maid who fell from a second-floor balcony, a woman walking in a period dress seen as either a figure or silhouette, leaving blood-stained footsteps behind as she walks along the veranda, the ghost of Harold, and a stable boy who lost his life due to a fire. Paranormal researchers have said that he is now thought to linger by the coach house. For 40 years, Harold had been chained up within the caretaker's cottage. He had been found lying by his mother's deceased body and was promptly sent to a home for the insane, as indelicately described at the time. Today you will know if Harold is drawing near by the sound of chains clanking together. Marketed as the most haunted house in Australia, Monte Cristo lives on as a popular spot for thrill seekers and believers of the supernatural to visit when in Australia. With tours of the house offered each Saturday at 6 p.m. for over 15-year-olds. This isn't a tour for the faint of heart. A tour around Monte Cristo could certainly cement your belief in the supernatural or convert you to an avid believer if you aren't already. Adam's Bridge. Structures made by early humans are understandably uncommon. Years of wear and tear, as well as intentional damage over the centuries, means that many of our ancestors' humble buildings have been lost to time. Because of this, you might be surprised to learn of a supposedly man-made structure that you very well may never have heard of. Pumban Island, a small island situated in the peninsula of India. Nearby is Manor Island, which belongs to Sri Lanka. You've likely never heard of these islands, let alone spotted them on a map. But in these islands lies one of the most fascinating pieces of local geography in all of Asia and possibly the entire world. Between Pumban and Manor Island is a series of shoals made out of limestone. These shoals extend the length of ocean between Pumban Island and Manor Island. And geological evidence strongly suggests that the area was once a land bridge connecting India and Sri Lanka. These shoals have come to be known as Adam's Bridge or Rama's Bridge, but many believe that the strange geological feature is not as natural as we might think and may actually be the result of someone or something putting it there. Stories of Adam's Bridge not being a natural occurrence are not anything new. In ancient Indian tradition, the demon Ramayana, the ruler of now Sri Lanka, captured Rama's wife in an act of revenge. The story goes that in order to cross the great expanse of water to Sri Lanka, a bridge was made through the help of Vanaras, which are intelligent monkey warriors. But recent claims have pointed towards less mystical origins, and some suggest that the strange limestone bridge could be a structure laid by human hands. One scientist in particular drive S. Padrina Rayanan, the former director of the Geological Survey of India as well as the former coordinator of the Survey Division of the National Institute of Ocean Technology, believes in this theory. Dr. Padrina Rayanan reportedly made an investigation on Ramos Bridge and now believes with certainty that the location is not a natural formation but one made with human intervention. Padrina Rayanan surveyed the bridge with the use of boreholes, drilling a total of 10 along its length. The findings of the investigation have led Dr. Padrina Rayanan, amongst others, to believe that a natural formation of the bridge is impossible. This is due to the claim that the team found a consistent layer of materials roughly 6 meters below the surface. This layer was made of sandstone, corals, and boulder formations. A group of divers later went to examine the underwater conditions of the bridge. The boulders observed from above were found to be atypical to that which is normally found in ocean waters and were later found to have originated on either the Indian or Sri Lankan side of the large causeway. This, along with signs that ancient quarrying took place in the area, brought Dr. Pedrina Rayanen to the conclusion that the materials were moved intentionally on the sand of the shallow waters. On the discovery, Dr. Pedrina Rayanen said it is not a natural formation. The top portion of it appears to be a man-made structure. What is known as Adams Bridge is originally a natural grade divide separating the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean to the south. So the geological aspects are different on either side. Dr. Pedrina Rayanen added, "We found marine sands on top and below that was a mixed assemblage of corals, calcareous sandstone and boulder-like materials. Surprisingly below that, up to 4.5 meters, again, we found loose sand and after that, hard formations were there. Below the corals and boulders, we are getting loose sand, which means it is not natural." Of course, scientists are in disagreement with Dr. Pedrina Rayanen's findings and the origins of the bridge more generally. Sivareth Kerr, a geology expert with a focus in marine geological formations, firmly disagrees with the man-made hypothesis. In his own words, during the Pleistocene Ice Age period, glacial buildup and melting forced fluctuations in sea level by tens of meters, setting up the conditions for several episodes of coral reef and sandshore formation. During periods of large sea level drops in the Pleistocene, there would have been a land in Sri Lanka. What do you think? Could this land bridge simply be a natural phenomenon, or is the evidence for human intervention just too much to ignore? The Iron Pillar of Delhi. If you are from outside of India, this is a famous historical object that you might not have come across. The Iron Pillar of Delhi is a structure that is exactly what its name implies. Nestled in the Kitab complex in Marali in Delhi, India, the Iron Pillar stands at a height of 23 feet 8 inches and a diameter of 16 inches. However, the Iron Pillar has a lot more hidden behind its interesting appearance. Created around 1,600 years ago, the Pillar of Delhi was constructed in such a way that it is rust-proof, meaning that it has been completely impervious to rust for over a millennium. The unique characteristics of the Iron Pillar have astounded people for centuries, especially in the modern era, as the rust-proof quality would be difficult to replicate even today. To add to this, the pillar shows no sign of rust despite being in ideal conditions for it to develop. Though India can be very hot and dry, it also suffers from monsoons. It is estimated that the pillar has likely seen around 1,000 monsoons in its lifetime, yet it still shows no sign of rust. For all of human history, we have slowly evolved in our understanding in masonry, engineering, and metalwork. Yet this somewhat banal pillar in India leaves a significant hole in our history books. Even the origins of the pillar are interesting to say the least. Made during the reign of Chandragupta II, the pillar was created in the center of India, just under 500 miles away from where it stands today. It roughly weighs a staggering 13,000 pounds, and to this day, we still don't know how the Indians of the past managed to move such a large, heavy structure such a distance. After years of exclamation, we now know some reasons behind the pillar's immaculate condition. According to scientists, the pillar was made using a thin layer of protective compound made of oxygen, iron, and hydrogen. In ancient India, this mixture was called misawite. Being only 1/20th of a millimeter thick, current researchers believe that the layer may have been a mistake. This is further supported by the fact that the pillar is the only one of its kind in India that has remained in such good condition. However, it is also possible that they may have included the layer in tension. In fact, some scientists do believe this theory. Another unique part of the pillar's construction is its use of charcoal. Usually limestone is used in the extraction process of iron, but the creation of the pillar swapped this for charcoal instead. More scientific characteristics involve zero appearance of sulfur and magnesium and a high-level phosphorus in the protective layer. From the touch of locals and tourists, which has begun to create signs of degradation on the pillar's surface. This can be explained due to the fact that the pillar was seen as a symbol of luck when a person would stand with their back facing to it and touching it with each hand. If this process was relatively simple compared to modern methods, why was it never adopted as a standard way of forming monuments? Clearly, the method and technology used to create the pillar was not carried down the generations. Oddly enough, there are signs that the pillar was hit by a cannonball at close range, which barely seemed to affect the structure at all. Furthermore, a Sanskrit inscription on the pillar referring to Chandra points to the idea that the iron pillar may have been an astrological tool or astronomical point of interest. Why was the USS Trepang in the Arctic? The USS Trepang was in the Arctic because of several reasons, which include Trepang moved to the Arctic in early 1971 for local operations in her home port. The Trapang operated under the polar ice cap to perform some extensive scientific investigations into the composition, geological record, and motion of the ice cap. USS Trapang was also in the Arctic to carry out some weapons systems evaluation and acceptance prosecutions and later carried out autonomous operations in the Atlantic Ocean. USS Trapang was placed in the Arctic to conduct several fast attack submarine exercise missions. Another reason was to participate in NATO operations, which became the first involvement of an American submarine to conduct peaceful operations with a submarine from Germany. Other missions and milestones included: Trapang was to carry out a weapons operations test on Florida's coast and complete a nuclear technical proficiency inspection before returning to London. The Trapang also participated in some operations with the 6th Fleet when there was tension because of the Yom Kippur War in 1973 in October in the Middle East. This was before going back to London for the regular post-deployment stand-down leave time and upkeep. Participate in the Carabex 17 exercise in the Caribbean, where the vessel was to undertake a variety of exercises that included the inspection of the submarine's technical proficiency. And in March 1975, Trapang was appointed to the submarine squadron. There's no single definitive answer as to why the vessel was in the Arctic at that moment in time, but many of the military missions at the time were kept secret and away from prying eyes. The UFO sighting of USS Trapang. Arctic UFO images from 1971 were released online, which quickly went viral and had UFO enthusiasts amazed. The images released were taken from the USS Trapang SSN 674 submarine as it made its way between Iceland and Norway's Jan Mayen Island. Various UFO enthusiasts claim the photographs are the definitive proof a secret U.S. aircraft test, while others online have claimed that the object seen in the photos is an alien craft looking for places to drill for oil and mine Earth's resources. Alex Mistretta, a paranormal investigator, studied the images when they were first released after they appeared in the French paranormal magazine Top Secret, according to the Black Vault. Mistretta claims his sources notified him that the pictures had been taken from the U.S. submarine, with the admiral on board at the time, Dean Reynolds. It's unknown how these images managed to end up being published in a French magazine, given that they were taken by the crew on board the submarine and were presumably stored in the U.S. military archives. Official records do seem to reinforce the validity of the claim, but the information is so readily available that many have called the evidence into question and claim it does nothing to certify the validity of the images. An inscription on one of the photos reads, "Official photograph not to be released, CT." Another reads, "An authorized disclosure subject, security certificate SSN 674, criminal sanction." Online commenters suggested all the images may be of a single object that has the ability to shapeshift. They are an odd selection of pictures that feature types of UFOs that have been regularly spotted by witnesses in all parts of the world, said Nigel Watson, author of the UFO Investigations Manual. Airship or long-shaped crafts have been reported since 1896, when there was a significant increase of phantom airship sightings throughout the USA. Nigel Watson notes how explorer Benjamin Trueblood found this when he began a polar expedition in 1908. The Eskimos he met were eager to talk about sighting an airship. There are numerous theories which suggest UFOs have secret bases in the Arctic. Perhaps this was some secret technology which had been launched from an underground base. There are some wild theories, but some which are also very plausible. Was the USS Trapang using this object as target practice? There isn't enough evidence to be taken from the photographs, which suggests that the UFO pictured was attempting to do so. Some people claim it could have been looking for new places to drill for oil and mine the Earth resources, while others claim it was an object which was being secretly used by the U.S. Navy as target practice in order to conduct new weapons tests. Whether or not the UFO was blown to pieces by the USS Trapang's deadly weapons systems or whether it was trying to investigate the Arctic alongside the submarine is anyone's guess. The United States military also reported that the object was a weather balloon, even though the newspaper's photograph suggested contrary to the report. A very similar situation to the one that the U.S. military found themselves in at Roswell. Weather balloons seem to be an easy way out for the U.S. military when it comes to explaining possible UFO sightings. Some more imaginative reports claim that bodies were recovered from the craft. Latex skin victims with aluminium bones fell from the atmosphere and were immediately picked up by the military. The aluminium bones were said to be of alien origin. Those who had witnessed the earlier sightings at Roswell saw the military action as a government cover-up of a secret mission. As for the Air Force, the dummies were a means of experimenting with new ways in which pilots can withstand falls. According to some studies, it is said that 50 years later, after the Roswell occurrence, the military published a report confiding that the wreckage at Roswell was a portion of the Mogul Project, which was a private atomic intelligence undertaking. Likewise, in the Soviet Union, secret military missile tests were often the cause of most of the UFO sightings. In 1948, the UFO sightings went up, which prompted the U.S. Air Force to start investigations on the statements known as Project Signs. During that time, there was the tension of the Cold War. Most researchers who were involved in the Trepang sightings claimed that the unidentified flying object was a sophisticated Soviet airliner. However, some studies say that the sightings might be a craft from another world. Although there is not much evidence of what the UFOs are, most people usually wonder why there are so many sightings near nuclear spots. The Robertson panel came up with some conclusions after a thorough investigation of the UFO sightings. One is that 90% of those sightings can be associated with the meteorological and astronomical occurrences such as iron clouds, meteors, bright planets, stars, and auroras. The second abduction was that the sights might be some earthly objects, balloons, searchlights, birds, among others. The report also said that there is no security threat posed by the UFOs. A portion of this report was kept confidential until 1979, and this prolonged privacy duration fueled several suspicions of a government cover-up. Area 51 is also a place where UFO sightings are a common occurrence, and some documents showed that this area was home to different Cold War projects. Oxgart was devoted to coming up with a spy airliner that would be undetectable so that it could be used to retrieve important data while completely invisible to radar. There are probably numerous secret government projects, just as there was back when the USS Trapong was sailing through the Arctic. It's highly likely that the sighting of the USS Trapong submarine was a secret government test. But what are your thoughts on the images? Do you think they are of alien origin? Ulbert Viking Sword. A series of swords have sparked conversation amongst various scientists, historians, skeptics, and believers alike for years. The Ulfberg Viking swords have been traced back to the Vikings but appear to have been made through modern techniques, making them thousands of years ahead of their time. Many say they are the swords made from technology of the future, as even today we are unsure how these steel swords were made by such ill-equipped societies. These swords were used in battle from 800 AD to 1100 AD. Despite this long period, they were a scarce sight, with very few warriors being believed to have used these swords. After 1100 AD, the Ulfbert are believed to have been largely untouched until they were uncovered in Europe an estimated 1,000 years after their initial creation. Ulfbert swords have been dubbed such due to the inscription alongside the blade, though no one knows why the sword term or even possible acronym has been engraved on the sword. In medieval written texts, there is no evidence of Ulfbert being used, adding to the speculation. Some believe it is a name of a place, a potential city of origin, and some think it was simply a mark of authenticity and quality in older historical periods. The aim of an ironsmith was to produce a steel that would not bend or break, a steel that could be sharp but not delicate. This was evidently achieved in the making of the Ulfbert swords. More recently, scholars have researched the etymological roots of Ulfbert, concluding that it is a Frankish name. Furthermore, the cross on the sword connotes a religious connection, more specifically to the Roman Catholic Church. This research is highly complementary. As the Church oversaw the Frankish Empire in the Middle Ages, so a strong connection being made between the Frankish roots of Ulfbert and the Roman Catholic cross is logical. Another key aspect to these swords you don't want to miss is the Greek cross appearing before the name. Typically, a placement of a cross before a name was reserved to indicate a bishop or abbot. This has led many researchers to suggest that Ulfbert is the name of either a bishop or abbot, and others have put forward the idea that Ulfbert could be the name of a monastery. So far, 44 Ulfbert swords have been examined and determined to be 100% steel, and only 170 swords have been proven to be Ulfbert at all. As with any object of such high status, copycats have occurred. Objects that bear a strikingly similar resemblance to these marvelous swords have ultimately been branded mimics. So where does the magic happen? The bizarre aspect to these battle swords is that they excel what we know to be possible for the time period in which they were created. How did Vikings create swords that were clearly so strong without the facilities to do so? The vast majority of swords we associate with the Viking period were characteristically low in carbon and full of impurities, aspects of the ore that weaken the metal. Throughout the medieval period, it was not physically possible to remove ore from the steel. The equipment we use today simply wasn't available. The process involved heating a metal to north of 3,000 degrees in order to add carbon and remove impurities, though fires alone simply are not hot enough to do this. It is believed that the Vikings would attempt to hammer out impurities, though this simply wasn't effective. Yet the Ulfbert steel is more similar to modern-day steel objects than those of the medieval period. When compared against 21st century steel and other medieval steel, the Ulfbert swords showed a far purer product, with the carbon content reaching 3 times higher than anticipated. This indicates that Ulfbert is, at a minimum, 1,000 years more advanced than it should be. Whether you wholeheartedly believe in magic or simply find these historical pieces curious, the strange backstories certainly do invite plenty of questions. The Black Mountain. Known as Caukajaka by the indigenous peoples living there, Black Mountain has its fair share of haunted stories and legends. This mountain is situated along the Trefethen Range in northern Queensland. It is made up of many giant granite boulders. Caukajaka translates to spear and was named for the last battleground between the inland and coastal clans as they fought for hunting grounds. It is a massive graveyard for their fallen warriors and is believed to be a place where devils and spirits wander about. The indigenous peoples in this area are taught to respect the mountain and actively avoid going there. They believe that you will get very sick if you visit it and that the spirits living there will torment you. The legends say that there are dark forces at work within the mountain, so they do not like when people visit it. Once settlers started arriving to colonize the lands in the 1800s, they also added onto these legends with their own experiences. Dozens of men have attempted to visit the mountain, but none ever made it back. Men, their horses, and entire herds of cattle have gone missing from this mountain. Infamous criminals ran into the mountain and caves to escape law enforcement and were never found despite intensive searches of the surrounding areas. Even the trackers that were sent in to find missing people also disappeared. There was only one case of a police officer who returned, but he was so distraught and unhinged that he was unable to ever give a report on it. It is nicknamed the Bermuda Triangle of northern Queensland as no one can fully explain what happens there. People who live nearby report eerie sounds that occur, especially during the night. When the wind blows through the rocks, it sounds like people or spirits screaming. When it rains and the rocks break down and fall, it sounds as if an explosion has just gone off. Some theories say that it is a man-made pyramid as it is located on one of the meridian points on our planet. In reality, it is just hard granite that was formed underneath the Earth's surface and was gradually exposed as the surface above it eroded. Weather shaped the rock into boulders and created deep fractures and cliffs. The dark color of the rock is also due to the blue-green algae that grows on it. Despite knowing how the rocks were formed, there is still no concrete explanation for all the missing persons. It is an extremely dangerous hike to get to the top of the mountain. It requires you to jump from rock to rock where any misstep can cause you to fall. The indigenous people dislike it when adventurers come to hike the mountain as they don't show any respect for it. If you want to visit it, you should take a guided tour led by the indigenous clans so that they can teach you about the cultural significance of it. Most people don't believe in the spirits that haunt the mountain, but they are still wary of the mountain. Some superstitions cannot be ignored. There's just something about Black Mountain that unnerves people. Leatherman the Vagabond. With a scary name like Leatherman, you would be forgiven for thinking this character was taken out of a horror film. But the photo of this disheveled man actually shows one of the most unique vagabonds in American history. The Leatherman, as locals called him, was a homeless man that walked stretches between the Connecticut River and Hudson River in the northeastern United States. The man, whose name can't be confirmed, became something of a local celebrity due to his cyclical route around the same small towns during the course of the years. Every year, the Leatherman walked 365 miles and would return to each town roughly every 34 days. The regularity of his walk meant that locals began to recognize him and gave him his nickname on account of his handmade leather hat, scarf, and clothes, as well as his dirty appearance. People liked Leatherman so much that 10 towns even made him exempt from the 1879 tramp law, which put restrictions on those who did not own a home or have a job. The Leatherman wandered the New England region and stayed in shelters made by rocks and small cliff sides. These small hovels are known as Leatherman Caves today in the local area. Roughly every 5 weeks, the Leatherman would stop off at towns to stock up on food and supplies. That said, the Leatherman was unable to speak English but was fluent. He was of Canadian origin. Some today even suggest he came from Picardy, France. While Leatherman was fluent in French, he was not known to speak any more than what was necessary, with heavy use of gesturing as well as grunting. He would very rarely use his broken understanding of English and was known to quickly close up when asked about his family. Amazingly, the Leatherman was able to survive for many years despite the harsh weather of the region, especially in the winter months. It's said that he was able to avoid the cold by creating fires in his small rock shelters, and he had not suffered from any lost fingers due to frostbite, despite most other vagabonds suffering severely. In 1888, the Connecticut Humane Society had him arrested and hospitalized against his will. Under hospital care, Leatherman was diagnosed as sane except for an emotional affliction. Since he didn't want to stay in care and had money, he was eventually released. Eventually, Leatherman passed away on the 24th of March, 1889 in his Saw Millwoods cave on the farm of George Dell near the town of Mount Pleasant, New York. He had passed away from cancer of the mouth caused by years of chewing tobacco on his long winding walks. John Darwin's disappearance. Unlike other disappearances on this list, this one is quite possibly the most dastardly. Michelle Whitaker left her old life behind due to the grievances of her mistakes and wanted a fresh beginning, feeling like she couldn't face her family or loved ones again. Linda Arteaga was tragically lost in the woods for days on end, an undoubtedly horrific and traumatic experience for the woman. John Darwin's disappearance, however, was one of manipulation, greed, and the desire to profit off a tragedy. John Darwin and his wife were deeply indebted after purchasing 2 properties, the mortgage from one of these being £130,000. Mr. Darwin created an elaborate plan to fix the married couple's financial troubles that, in his eyes, was absolutely flawless. He planned to fake his own death and his wife and was going to help. In March 2002, John Darwin went out on his kayak. He was reported missing the same day when he failed to come to work. A huge sea search took place to find him, as the sea is generally a tremendously dangerous place. And if someone goes missing at an aquatic scene, it is best to search for them immediately. Every second wasted is a second in which a victim could pass away. Nobody or trace of him was found. Following day, the wreckage of Darwin's kayak was discovered. The rescuers were puzzled, if not somewhat suspicious, as the sea had been calm the day he'd gone missing, and it seemed unlikely that anything could have happened to him on the waves. Still, John Darwin was presumed lost at sea and eventually pronounced deceased. The couple faked his death from 2002 to 2007. During this time, Darwin resided in a bedsit flat next door to their family home, only to secretly move back in in 2003, and was granted £250,000 after his passing as part of his life insurance, which paid off their mortgages. In 2004, the couple decided they should move abroad, considering Cyprus. Darwin managed to obtain a passport under the name John Jones, yet he used his real address. From 2004 to 2007, John Darwin was traveling from Cyprus to Kansas to Newcastle and Cornwall using his fake passport, interchanging between the alias John Jones and John Williams. And John chose Panama as the next place to live and flew out to see some properties. During this time, a photograph of them was taken and posted on the internet by a Panamanian property agent. They proceeded to buy an apartment for £50,000 under the name of their son Mark, and returned to sell their home in the UK, and John remained in Panama. In May 2007, they bought a tropical estate in Escobal, Cologne worth £200,000. They returned to Panama in July of the same year and stayed there for 6 weeks. It was only in September of 2007 that Anne's work colleague became wary of the situation after she overheard a phone call and was having with John. Their home was sold for £295,000 in October and afterwards, and returned to Panama, ready to begin their new life together. This is until they realized that their identities would have to be confirmed by the UK police in order to live in Panama, and they plotted to have John fake amnesia over the past 5 years. He went to a police station in London, except between selling their house and buying properties abroad, and her colleagues tipped to the police they didn't buy the story. A police investigation had already been ongoing for months without their knowledge. They were both sentenced to 6 years in prison for fraud and forced to repay everything they took from the life insurance, cost of their sold home, and other fines and costs. To have a loved one go missing is an awful experience, and to think some people would take advantage of such tragedies in order to gain a profit is awful. The Trump family, it is a commonly held belief that if a missing person, or in this case missing people, are found, then explanations about where they went and what happened while they were gone will ultimately follow. This, however, was not the case with the Trumps, a family of 5 who went missing during a technology-free road trip and turned up at their farm one by one after a week-long journey. It would have been strange to say before this incident that the Trump family were anything but a normal, hard-working household. The 5 lived in Australia. The parents, Mark Trump, who was 51 years old, and Jacoba, who was 53, lived on a successful red currant farm and ran an earth-moving business on the outskirts of Melbourne. The 2 parents and their 3 adult children left without a warning. Rihanna, 29, Mitchell, 25, and Ella, 22, all accompanied their parents on the sudden road trip, leaving behind their phones, passports, and cash at home, except for Mitchell, who brought his phone along. Their parents seemed to have been feeling afraid and paranoid, believing that someone was out to attack them. Because of this, within an hour of driving off, Mitchell was forced to throw his phone out of the window, leaving the family digitally disconnected from the rest of the world. What happened next was almost stranger. As the road trip from their home in Sylvan to Wangaratta continued, each of the family members left one by one, turning up in different places until they returned home. The first to leave was Mitchell, who separated from his family upon their arrival in the New South Wales town of Bathurst. Next, Ella and Rihanna were separated from their parents upon reaching the popular tourist spot of Genolan Caves. The 2 stole a car and drove south to the city of Goulburn, where they reported their parents missing to the police. News of the family then started to spread. Many people wondered how the seemingly normal family could have ended up so scattered and lost during a 1-week excursion in a country that they should have been quite familiar with. The 2 sisters separated thereafter, with Ella saying she wanted to return home to feed the horses. She was the first of the family to be located back at their house. Rihanna, on the other hand, climbed into the back of a utility vehicle in Gulba. She was not found until about an hour later by the male driver, who reported that she was in what appeared to be a mentally unstable catatonic state. Rihanna seemed to have forgotten what her name was and where she was, therefore was taken to a hospital in Goulburn, where she remained in psychiatric care. Due to her mental health issues, she was not charged for stealing the car, but Ella, who seemed to be of a fine mental state, was. The last 2 to be parted and lost were the 3 children's parents, Jacoba and Mark. The 2 were separated in the town of Wangaratta when Jacoba left to travel north again, until she was found in Yass wandering around in a very agitated state. It seemed she was mentally unwell, and Jacoba was taken to a hospital there until she was later moved to be with her daughter Rihanna in the Goulburn Hospital for mental health treatment. The last of the family was Mark, who stayed in Wangaratta. He partook in a number of strange activities, such as tailgating a young couple and later abandoning and fleeing his daughter's Peugeot, with which the family had started their strange journey. 6 days after the road trip initially began, Mark Trump was found on a roadside near the Wangaratta airport. He was questioned by the police and assessed by a mental health officer before being released to his brother, who was also a policeman. About a month later, he and the rest of his family seemed to have mostly recovered. There was still mystery surrounding the sudden road trip and the family separations. None of the members of the Trump family, including Mitchell and Ella, who were deemed mentally fit, could really explain what had happened. There remain many speculations today, from medication to a collective delusion referred to as a folie à deux, that might have led the family to believe, without evidence, that they were in danger and needed to escape. The real reason remains a mystery. Andreas Grassi, the Piano Man. Our next mysterious person is none other than Andreas Grassi, better known as Piano Man. He is a German man who was 20 years old when he was admitted to the Kent Hospital in the UK. He was found near a beach on the Isle of Sheppey soaking wet. He had no identification on him, and when brought to the hospital, he was unable to speak to the healthcare workers. It appeared as if he had washed ashore and people saw him near an abandoned boat. He was found when he had made his way into town, delusional and unable to talk. Once brought to the hospital, they cleaned him up and worked on discovering who he was. They spent 4 months trying to figure out where this man was from and what his name was. Instead of talking, he dazzled the hospital with his ability to play the piano. As he sat by the piano and worked his magic, he was calm and finally able to relax. Reporters and experts worked tirelessly to get to know the Piano Man and get a photo of him. The problem was, anytime someone new came near him, he would scream. A photographer tried to find a way to get an image of the man without such a visceral reaction. He hid in the bushes with his camera in hand and was able to capture 5 photos before he spotted him. When he saw the photographer, he began making unusual noises and strange faces. And see how the photos turned out. 2 did not turn out, so he was left with only 3 images. To this day, those are the only photos that have ever been taken of him. You may be wondering if he was unable to speak, how was he identified? His father, Joseph Grassi, eventually came forward when his son was featured all over the media. He refused to speak for the entirety of his stay at the hospital, but he would play the piano. That finally, after months of suffering from severe depression, he broke his silence and said he was from Germany. He eventually returned home to Germany shortly after. His family was overcome with relief when he came home to live with them. Later, his lawyer described him as mentally ill, although it has not been confirmed. What do you think happened to Piano Man before he was found? Do you think it is unusual that he was unable to speak and only found comfort in the piano? It's interesting to see how people cope with different situations, and whilst we don't have all the missing pieces to this mystery, it's certainly nice to know that he brought joy to others during his time in the hospital. Report of 68 skeletons averaging 7 feet tall, Charleston Daily Mail, September 20, 1916. Many critics surrounding the claims of recovered giant humanoid skeletons have often remarked that many of the researchers and excavators surrounding these peculiar skeletal discoveries are often amateur or paid day laborers who do not have an extensive education on skeletons, believing that many of these large humanoid skeletons are merely normal human skeletons that were reassembled incorrectly. Interestingly enough, a fairly recent discovery made by the professor of American Indian Museum near Sarah, Pennsylvania dispels this critique. As the professor himself remarked at the strange size of skeletons that were recovered at the Tioga Point Mound back on the 13th of July of 1916. The finding was reported by the Charleston Daily Mail of Sarah, Pennsylvania, and included a short detail of the uncovering of 68 full skeletons that averaged 7 to 8 feet in height and were believed to have been buried together in a large Indian burial mound estimated to have been between 700 and 800 years old. The article is quoted as saying, on July 13th, Professor Skinner of the American Indian Museum excavating the mound at Tioga and covered the bones of 68 men, which he estimates had been buried at least 700 or 800 years ago. The average height indicated by the skeletons was 7 feet, but many were taller. Evidence of the gigantic size of these men was seen in huge axes found beside the bones. The mystery of the Anunnaki, our third and final mystery, takes us on an exploration of the Anunnaki, powerful Sumerian gods who were said to control the destinies of humankind and were believed by some to be actual human beings, as reflected in their description as children of the earth and sky. Although there is strong evidence of their existence on Earth, all those thousands of surround these ancient religious entities, with much being written about these otherworldly gods and their role in our own creation. One theory classifies the Anunnaki as extraterrestrial beings, ancient astronauts from another planet. In the infamous book The 12th Planet, published in 1976, Zecharia Sitchin proposes his theory on the origins of humanity, that the Anunnaki came from the planet Nibiru and were sent to God to mine gold, and created the first humans to mine gold using pieces of their own DNA. In his book, Slave Species of the Gods, The Secret History of the Anunnaki and Their Mission on Earth, Michael Tellinga supports Sitchin's theory by revealing physical proof in the form of new archaeological evidence of the Anunnaki's presence on Earth. This included ancient sites in South Africa which agree with Sumerian descriptions of where the Anunnaki mines were located and the system of tunnels leading to gold mines. Jan-Erik Sigdahl, in his book, Reign of the Anunnaki, The Alien Manipulation of Our Spiritual Destiny, which studies ancient descriptions of the Anunnaki that shows them resembling winged reptiles or amphibians, in support of claims that the Anunnaki were a species of reptilian beings. Others yet believe that the Anunnaki are still around to this day, wielding power over humankind. Whatever the truth about these early aliens, the debate continues to rage as to their possible continued existence, with, as recently as last year, conspiracy theorist David Icke claiming their connection to the worldwide pandemic. Yet an even bigger question remains to this day. Do the Anunnaki still exist? And if they do, where are they, and do they continue to control man's fate? Where then does the truth about these mystifying beings lie? One of the most fascinating things about Sumerian civilization is its parallels with modern-day religious stories. Despite living thousands of years before Christ, the Sumerians' way of life was very advanced in its own respect despite not being fully understood. However, some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. The disappearance of the Flannan lighthouse keepers. As a lighthouse keeper, work can be dangerous, and in emergency situations help is often too far away. This appeared to be the case when 3 workers, James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, sent shockwaves around the world with their sudden disappearance from Flannan Lighthouse. The disappearance was brought to light when a ship called Hesperus set sail for Eileen Moore. As previously planned, Captain James Harvey was delivering a relief lighthouse keeper to Flannan Lighthouse. However, on arrival at the lighthouse, he realized something strange was going on. The flagstaff had no flag. All the provision boxes had been left on the landing, and none of the 3 lighthouse keepers were there to welcome the ship. Even when Harvey sounded a whistle and shot a flare to try to catch the lighthouse keeper's attention, the island remained silent. A sailor, Joseph Moore, was sent on a boat to investigate further. According to reports, he experienced a sense of foreboding coming up to the lighthouse. When he arrived, he found the entrance gate and main door closed, beds unmade, clocks stopped, and no sign of the lighthouse keepers in the lighthouse or on the island. Moore reported this back to Harvey, who immediately sent a telegram to the Northern Lighthouse Board stating that a dreadful accident had happened at the Flannans, where 3 keepers, Duckett, Marshall, and the occasional, have disappeared from the island. Robert Muirhead, a Northern Lighthouse Board superintendent, was tasked with setting up an official investigation into the incident. On arriving, Muirhead focused closely on the ropes strung along the island. From this, he theorized that in the middle of a storm, the men had gone down to the rocks to secure a box in which the mooring and landing ropes were kept, and while doing so, the men had been swept away. Muirhead's theory that water took out the 3 lighthouse keepers seems credible. Firstly, looking at the geography of Eileen Moore, the caves on the west would have been flooded by water in high seas or storms, and this water would then explode out with considerable force and cause the type of wall of water that could have swept the 3 lighthouse keepers away. Alternatively, a storm could have washed the men away. The island was known to have experienced its share of storms. Duckett had experienced his dislike of the dangerous weather to his family before, and the construction of the lighthouse took 2 years longer than planned due to delays caused by rough seas and harsh weather. On the island, there was evidence of recent storms, as the iron railings of the trolley tramway had broken in several places and the box containing the ropes had vanished despite having been firmly anchored into a crevice. One thing Muirhead could not explain was why 3 experienced lighthouse keepers would risk going out in stormy weather conditions. This question was answered when James Love's research on the mysterious case unveiled that Marshall had previously been fined 5 shillings for equipment that had been washed away in a gale. Love used this fresh piece of evidence to strengthen Muirhead's theory. It was the fear of having another fine imposed for washed-away equipment that led the men to leave the lighthouse and go to the rocks. Love argues that MacArthur had stayed in the lighthouse, but seeing danger approach, the other 2 keepers had rushed out without his coat to warn them before also being swept away. With Love's modifications, Muirhead's theory sounds plausible. However, it still could not answer why Moore found the entrance gate and main door closed when arriving at the lighthouse. If the 3 lighthouse keepers were in a rush, they surely wouldn't have had time to lock up the lighthouse, particularly if they thought they would soon be returning. The theory also fails to explain the log entries supposedly written by the 3 missing lighthouse keepers. These log entries hint that unusual events were taking place before their disappearance. Marshall writes of severe winds, the likes of which I have never seen before in 20 years. That's left Duckett very quiet and MacArthur crying. Given the men's experience in marine work and MacArthur's reputation for brawling, this behavior seems out of character. Log entries on the 13th of December mention a raging storm that left all 3 men praying, which is puzzling as they would have known they were safe in a secure lighthouse structure far above sea level. Even stranger is that no storms were recorded during these dates. This has led some to believe paranormal activity was taking place on the island. Eileen Moore has a history of unsettling accounts. This chapel was said to move even the most non-religious person to worship and rituals, such as circling the building on your knees. Herders would never dare allow their sheep to graze overnight because they believed the land to be haunted, and there were tales of sightings of strange creatures such as giant birds and little men. Some say that this paranormal atmosphere might have led the 3 lightkeepers to madness. Known to be a volatile man, might have been sent over the edge and murdered the other 2 lighthouse keepers and then taken his own life. All the 3 men might have decided to flee the island and seek greener pastures. We already know how unhappy Duckett was to be living in a lighthouse from his correspondence with home. Despite nationwide speculation, there is still no perfect solution to answer what happened to the 3 lighthouse keepers who disappeared on Eileen. Benjamin Briggs, Mary Celeste. The mystery of the Mary Celeste has been speculated upon for almost 3 centuries. In 1872, the Mary Celeste was uncovered on the coast of Portugal, entirely devoid of any signs of life from the crew which once boarded it. Among the missing crew was Benjamin Briggs, the ship's captain and master mariner. The ship was still under sail, and in almost pristine condition despite 1 lifeboat missing and no men on board. Sarah Briggs, Benjamin's wife, and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia disappeared along with him, all presumed to have passed away. The Briggs bloodline carried the maritime passion in its veins. The ocean was Benjamin's whole world, which shaped him into an experienced sailor who knew the dangers of the sea, often sailing together with his brother, Oliver Briggs. The master mariner was heavily faithful to God and married Sarah, the daughter of a reverend, in 1862. Together they sailed all over Europe and had 2 children, including their eldest son, Arthur Briggs. Oliver and Benjamin planned on purchasing a hardware store in New Bedford and giving up their sea legs. But in 1872, Benjamin bought a share in James Winchester's Mary Celeste, a merchant ship, and decided to do one last voyage, before giving up their marine passion for good. It is tragically ironic that this was to be his final journey. Benjamin and Sarah's son, Arthur, survived, having been at his grandmother's during the time of the voyage, and the Briggs have living relatives. You will never know what fate became of these great explorers. Despite the pessimistic nature of their disappearances, the missing rowboat on the Mary Celeste leaves the hope that the crew, and if not at least the Briggs family, survived and settled elsewhere. Perhaps the Cortarial brothers let go of their noble bloodline and chose to live amongst the natives of Labrador. Maybe Roald Amundsen found something extraordinary and unimaginable in the skies as he flew over the Arctic, or perhaps they simply perished in the dangerous circumstances of their journeys. Whatever your theory may be, it changes not the fact that we may never truly get the satisfaction of uncovering what happened to these great men, but we can keep their memory and achievements. James Dean's Porsche. Our last interesting photo is of James Dean's Porsche. The late actor passed away in 1955 when he was 24 years old and driving in California. He was in a Porsche 550 Spider and collided with a 1950 Ford Tudor, which was driven by a Navy veteran. While Dean was unable to survive the accident, his mechanic, Rolf Wutherich, was coming out on the other side alive and well. After the accident, there were many photos taken to be presented in court. There were 12 overhead views of the intersection and 18 ground-level photos, 9 of which were close-ups. 6 of the photos had inside and outside view of the Porsche that showed his racing number 130. When looking at the photos, Wutherich versus Turnip Seed Dean Coulter was written in pencil. It referred to Wutherich's attempt to sue for the double-fractured jaw and torn left hip that left him to undergo multiple surgeries. Nothing came of the legal proceedings, and eventually Wutherich returned to Germany in 1957. Also in the photos was a signed letter from Robert A. Coyle, who was the son of Robert Everett Coyle, who was an attorney for the Turnip Seed and his insurance company. The car went on to be sold for $5,335,000 at an auction, as it was sought after by many high-end collectors. Whilst the previous owner was a famous actor, that is not why it sold for so much. It was due to the unique story behind the death. Many believed the car to be cursed. The moment Dean bought it, he experienced problems with it. Many people also warned him about buying the car, one being Alec Guinness, who said that he'd be dead within a week if he drove that Porsche. What is most eerie about the is that he died exactly 7 days after having that conversation and 2 hours after he got a speeding ticket whilst driving the car. Do you think that the car was cursed, or was it simply an accident? 8-year-old girl discovers Iron Age sword in Swedish lake. Like a story ripped from the mythos of King Arthur or the imagination of a young child, not many people expect to discover a sword lying in the waters of a lake. You can then imagine the surprise and excitement felt by 8-year-old Saga Venesek when she found an Iron Age sword sitting in the bottom of Lake Vidustern in Sweden. I like to walk around finding rocks and sticks in the water. And then I usually walk around with my hands and knees in the water and in the sand, Saga said. Whilst Saga was wading through the shallow waters of Lake Vidustern, she noticed a strange sensation under her. She was familiar with playing and crawling in the lake, and she quickly noticed that it felt different to the soft sand that she was normally used to. After reaching down beneath herself, Saga pulled up the object and took it to her father. "Dad, I found a sword," she said. Her father, while impressed with his daughter's discovery, suggested they be careful with the sword until they had authorities investigate it. "I'm not sure you should be touching it anymore," he said. It looks fragile. Michael Nordstrom, head of the Cultural Heritage Department at the Jönköpings County Museum, was incredibly excited at the discovery made by young Saga. Indeed, an amazing story, he said. We now believe that the sword is about 1,500 years old. According to the museum's investigations, the discovered sword is roughly 33 inches in length and is exceptionally well preserved. The sword is in such good condition that it still has its sheath, which is made from wood and leather. Additional searches in the lake also led to the discovery of some metal jewelry from around 300 to 400 AD. Why it has come to be there, we don't know. Nordstrom said of the sword, but perhaps it's a place of sacrifice. At first, we thought it could be graves situated nearby the lake, but we don't think that anymore. Speaking of her discovery, Saga said it was pretty cool and that it was exciting. It's not that common that you find a sword that is 1,500 years old. Lorena Garcia was a well-educated 41-year-old woman. On what seemed to be another normal day in July 2008, Lorena woke up just like any other. As she went about her normal daily routine, she seemed to notice small details that were out of place. She became increasingly aware that something wasn't quite right. She could remember the sheets and pajamas that she went to bed in, but the ones she woke up in were different. She put these details down to confusion and continued to go about her daily routine. She got in her car and drove to the place where she worked. She knew the drive well as part of her daily routine for the past 20 years. She eventually arrived at the place she had worked at for so long. Upon arriving, her confusion got the better of her once again. She walked to the department where she worked only to find that it was no longer there. The location was the same. The department wasn't. There was a different name tag on the door of the office she had worked from, and to make things appear stranger, she met her boss. But this boss was someone she could never recall meeting before. She decided to check the personal information on her credit cards, driver's license, and work ID. These all seemed to confirm what she thought. They showed the same name, same picture, same numbers, and same home address. Confused as to what was going on, Lorena decided it was best to take a sick day and head home. When she arrived, she found the man with whom she had separated 6 months ago was in her house. He was acting strange, like the separation had never happened and like the two were still together. The person she had been in a relationship with for the past 4 months was nowhere to be seen. She hired a private detective eager to know where he had gone, but his whereabouts remained a mystery. No trace of him or his family could be identified, and there was no sign of him at the place where Lorena knew he lived. Lorena Garcia's case is another of the most famous examples of alleged travel to an alternate dimension. Lorena, however, was unable to travel back to the previous dimension. She believed she woke up here and is unable to go back to her previous life. Though some skeptics believe her experiences are due to a neurological malfunction, Lorena firmly believes she has traveled to another dimension of existence. Fariba Amani disappeared while on a cruise with her boyfriend. The last thing you would expect while on a beautiful tropical cruise between the Bahamas and Florida is to disappear without a trace. However, that is exactly what happened to beautician Fariba Amani while on a cruise with her loving boyfriend. Her disappearance was reported by none other than her boyfriend, Ramiz Gulshani, whom she apparently had a tumultuous relationship with. Naturally, suspicion was cast onto him as prime suspect. Even Amani's sister said that Amani was thinking about breaking up with Gulshani before the trip occurred. Gulshani had a different story. The night before he reported her disappearance, he left for the casino at about 1 a.m. while Amani went straight to the gift shop. As soon as he arose in the morning, he claimed that she was nowhere to be found. Even though authorities never labeled him as a suspect, Amani's family did not put his story behind him. Saying that she was never drunk, they firmly believed that her disappearance was not accidental. Gulshani had never tried to contact them either, which further affirmed their doubts. He claimed that he was very tired, exhausted enough to even refuse an interview with the Vancouver Sun. However, he reiterated that he wanted Amani safe and sound back home. If she did not return, was leaving 2 kids behind. After a search was conducted of the cruise ship that carried more than 1,100 passengers, there was no trace of Amani at all. Even the ocean waters near the Bahamas and Florida produced no results once the Coast Guard finished trawling the area. In the end, only a burning question remains. Was this a murder at the hands of her boyfriend, or was it simply an accident? It's a mystery that just might remain unexplained forever. The Poe toaster Edgar Allan Poe had an intriguing life, but a secretive figure named by locals as the Poe toaster adds another layer of mystery to the infamous writer. Poe passed away in 1849, aged 40, under mysterious circumstances. However, many years later, a visitor started coming to his grave with an odd ritual. It is disputed what year the Poe toaster started his ritual, with most saying it began in the 1950s, some believing it started earlier, with another source stating that it started on the centennial of Poe's passing. For 75 years, the visitor attended the grave in Baltimore, Maryland on Poe's birthday, January 19th, with a particular ritual. The Poe toaster would arrive wearing a wide-brimmed black hat with a black coat and white scarf. He poured himself a glass of cognac and recited a brief toast to the deceased writer, before leaving behind the remaining cognac in a bottle, a note, and 3 specifically arranged red roses. The roses were believed to represent Poe, his wife Virginia, who passed away of tuberculosis, and his mother-in-law Maria Clem. The significance of the cognac was not immediately clear, but a 2004 note implied that this was a tradition of the toaster's family rather than being related to Poe. There have been many theories as to who the Poe toaster was. A prevailing theory is that it was multiple people rather than just one Poe enthusiast, or perhaps it was a relative of the prolific master of macabre. A note in 1999 stated that the torch had passed, perhaps alluding to a son taking over his father's work, reiterating a 1993 note that said a torch will be passed. It was reported that whoever took over did not take the tradition as seriously as there, with the Poe toaster sometimes turning up in normal clothes or the note not following the same themes as the originals. The visitor's identity has never been uncovered, but the ritual stopped in 2009 on the bicentennial of Poe's birthday. Despite crowds gathering to witness the Poe toaster's ritual, no one was able or willing to uncover who it was. An obscure photo was published in 1990 which the publication claimed was the Poe toaster. Jeff Giroux, the former curator of the Baltimore Poe House and Museum, has often been thought to be the Poe toaster, but has denied it while admitting that he knows more about the toaster's identity than anyone else. In 2016, the tradition was resurrected by the Maryland Historical Society, choosing a new person each year through an organized competition to carry out the ritual of the Poe toaster. The identity of the new Poe toaster is kept anonymous each year, keeping it in line with the original, but it is made into more of an event with an audience and festivities. The disappearance of the Chacouf. Serving as the largest French Navy cruiser submarine during World War II, the Chacouf was designed to be at sea for long periods away from military bases and facilities. Commissioned by the French Navy in 1934, it cruised distant waters for 8 years before mysteriously vanishing sometime in the night on February 18, 1941 in the Caribbean Sea. The Chacouf was built to pursue and destroy enemy vessels, work with the Navy squadrons, and connect to the French colonies. It had weapons similar to a naval warship, focusing on long-range firings and high speeds. It aimed to seek out enemies and engage in combat, and had enough food and supplies for 90-day missions. It possessed torpedoes, cannons, a motorboat, a float plane, and a large space for up to 40 prisoners. Despite its formidable design, it struggled a bit with firing weapons because of the time it needed to activate weapons, difficulty calculating the angle of its roll, and the inability to see at night. In 1940, the submarine was in overhaul in Brittany, France when the Germans invaded. With only one working engine and a broken rudder, it swam across the channel and joined the British. They completed its refitting to return it to Free France. But tensions were high as both the British Royal Navy and the Free French Navy accused each other of spying for Vichy France. Nonetheless, the Chacouf returned to the French resistance and continued fighting against the Axis powers. It began its journey when it accompanied Free France convoys in 1941 to liberate French colonies like the islands Saint-Pierre and Miquelon. In January 1942, the Chacouf planned to travel to Sydney, Australia, through the Panama Canal and the Pacific. On the 2nd of February, it made its way down from Halifax, Virginia to Bermuda. On the 12th of February, it set off for the Panama Canal. The Chacouf vanished on the 18th of February, 130 kilometers north of Cristobalcolin, a port town in northern Panama on the Caribbean side, as it made its way to the Pacific Ocean. It is believed that the submarine collided with an American freighter, the Thompson Lakes, coming from Guantanamo Bay. The freighter's captain and crew reported running down something partially submerged, scraping against it with their side and keel. Some even claimed that they heard voices out on the water, but the freighter did not stop to find out what it hit. Investigators are doubtful that this American freighter ran into the Chacouf, as there are significant size discrepancies. The submarine was much too large to have only slightly damaged the ship. Even eyewitness account descriptions recounted a smaller-sized submarine. The current belief is that it might have been sunk by friendly fire from a flying boat on patrol that same night. It was an exceptionally dark night and they perhaps had trouble recognizing whether it was a German or Japanese submarine. Is that their radio was broken and the 6th Bombardment Group in Panama attacked it. The fate of the Chakaf remains a mystery to this day. No official dive or search of the sea has been conducted, so its location is still unknown. 130 sailors were on that submarine, both from the French and British Navy, and are considered lost at sea. Family survives 34 days in Peru jungle eating berries. As the old adage goes, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. However, for one family of 4, the destination was everything. After a pleasant visit to relatives near the border of Peru and Colombia in late 2019, a family of 4, which consisted of a mother and her 3 young children, made the slow trek to Puerto Leguizamo in neighboring Colombia. The original plan was to meet up with the father in Colombia. However, this was not meant to be. During the journey, the mother lost her sense of direction and veered off the planned route, becoming completely lost near the Putumayo River. Things escalated quickly and they became stranded in the midst of the dense Peruvian jungle with no means of contacting the outside world. Hope was quickly waning. Their primal instincts kicked in and they soon realized that they could sustain themselves by foraging the jungles for anything to eat, such as seeds, berries, and fruits, anything to keep going. They also tried to maintain at least some sense of direction by following the Putumayo River, which brought them into Peru unwittingly. Meanwhile, upon realizing his family may have suffered some grave misfortune after not showing up at the agreed meeting point, the father raised the alarm with the authorities. And a search began. It was starting to look hopeful that the family could come out of this alive, with the full might of search parties coupled with their good instincts. But it is probably a good idea to mention how long the family were in the jungle for. 34 whole days surviving alone in the wilderness. After 34 days of hunter-gatherer lifestyle, the family were finally found. Although not by authorities as you would expect, but by members of a Peruvian indigenous group called the Sequoia on the outskirts of a village called Ubito. The members swiftly alerted the appropriate authorities, and before they knew it, the family were being whisked away by a hovercraft 110 miles to the original destination of Puerto Leguizamo. There the family were reunited with the father in an emotional scene that was televised to the nation. Although it all ended well, the tolls of the jungle were not easily forgotten. All 4 were dehydrated, malnourished, and smothered in insect bites, with some barely able to stand on their own 2 feet. They were fortunate, though, receiving hospital treatment and testing for any of the vicious diseases that call the jungle home, such as malaria and dengue fever. There is no doubt that this was a remarkable feat of survival, especially considering this was a mother with her 3 young children to support. I think it is safe to say this goes to show that sometimes the journey is not always the best part of life. Geomagnetic fields and pyramids. Much to the shock of many modern people, Teotihuacan had advanced technology for its era with professional engineering, elaborate tunnel systems beneath pyramids, and even something akin to an ancient generator that combined mineral and chemical waters into built-in chambers that created natural sources of energy. We are not sure how the energy was used and delivered, but it shows that the people of Teotihuacan were significantly more intelligent than other civilizations of the time. Sergio Gomez, an archaeologist in 2003, found a hidden tunnel beneath the temple of Quetzalcoatl. Recent heavy rainfall made the cracks in the tunnel open up and expand, revealing it on the surface and creating a noticeable divot large enough to potentially cause harm to unexpected visitors touring the city. Because of the potential for injury, Sergio Gomez inspected the cracks further. It was then that he realized it was actually a tunnel. Because of the antiquity of Teotihuacan, archaeologists are wary of the fact that artifacts could be hidden in plain sight. Every movement must be careful lest it destroys some vital information of the reality the Aztecs lived in. Every stone and pebble may hold a vast history. Short for National Institute of Anthropology and History, Gomez proceeded to investigate with a team of other professionals who helped him remove surface debris. The excavation was tedious and slow, but eventually Dr. Gomez was lowered into a well shaft 14 feet deep that opened up into the tunnel's cavern. The main goal was to search for artifacts, but they found the main access point to the energy complex that proceeded to go down over 40 feet. Over 400 tons of debris had to be cleared for them to access the area properly. Laser scanners revealed that the cavern went a shocking 330 feet below the surface of the pyramid and had small room chamber-like pockets cut carefully into the sides of the cavern's main shaft. Before even getting into digging, the archaeological team immediately found a plethora of artifacts and fantastic discoveries of tools left behind by ancient builders, who were evidently experienced and knew exactly what they were doing. In total, over 50,000 artifacts and classical tools were found in the cavern shaft, making the modern archaeologists consider the potential for a royal tomb to lay somewhere either in or near the tunnel. Furthermore, there was proof of water markings in the tunnel and proof of the mineral energy generator that was suspected to have been used in the city by the ancient people who lived there. There were also various mineral sediments within the ground itself. The gravel held traces of chemicals thought to have been used to generate the energy. The electromagnetic energy present in these caverns shows a professional level of precision. These natural mineral chemical generators are present throughout all Central America and Mesoamerican lands, showing that this was relatively common knowledge for the various people who once lived there. Mundo Perdido and Quetzalcoatl pyramids all have these electromagnetic signatures and charges. Archaeologist Burke commented on the voltage found at these sites. These voltages might sound lethal, and if it were a household current, they could be. However, static electric charge in the air is a different type of electricity, and even 1,000 volts is not dangerous. The science remains unknown to us, just out of reach. Christopher Lee Cessna missing in 2011. Christopher Lee Cessna was announced missing. The disappearance of Cessna was reported to the Cary Police Department on April 27, 2011. Cessna, aged 45 at the time of the disappearance, would now be 55 as of 2021. The delayed involvement of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park compared to the other harrowing cases discussed is because Christopher Lee Cessna was not a hiker and his family had no reason to believe he was heading to the mountains. So why did the mountainous national park become such a central element to the case? A car was parked at the newfound Gap parking area for a number of weeks, and initially this caused no concern, with it often having cars left for long periods of time due to the popular Appalachian Trail that runs through it. However, one particular car was not expected to be there, and many doubt that its owner was hiking. Cessna's 2009 Audi was found at the National Park's car park. Once this connection had been made, park rangers began to search for the missing man, checking the Appalachian Trail, the car park, and any other routes that may connect. Indications that he may have ventured off-trail were being actively looked out for, as well as shelter logs for the possibility that his name may have appeared. Tragically, not long before his disappearance, Cessna had been described as seemingly low on hope and fulfillment, and the handgun he is known to have owned was nowhere to be found within his home. Many suspect that he ended his life. It is the nightmare of many parents, family members, and friends to have a loved one go missing and be gripped with uncertainty, and the harshness of the mountains can only heighten those fears. Our thoughts are with those who are missing a loved one. The underground city of Aztlán. Aztlán is the fabled ancestral home of the Aztecs. The location of Aztlán is thought to have been in northwestern Mexico or the southwest U.S., but it is unknown if Aztlán was ever a real place or mythical land of fables. Legend states that 7 tribes lived in the underground caves of Aztlán. Some claims of Aztlán contradict each other. Sometimes it is painted as a paradise. Other times it is said that Aztlán was ruled by a tyrant named Azteca Chico Mostoca. It is believed their priest led the Aztecs out of Aztlán and to the Valley of Mexico. Aztlán may be a fabricated world such as Camelot or Atlantis, as no physical proof of its existence has ever been found. Nevertheless, just like Atlantis, there are believers in the claim of its authenticity. Searches for this mystic land have been conducted all the way from Mexico to Utah but have been fruitless. Though never physically identified, Aztlán is described in ancient legends as a long-lost secret island, further cementing its connection with the mystery of Atlantis in the eyes of theorists, though rather than being an island in the traditional sense, it is depicted as being an island on top of a lake. But because of the links it has to Atlantis, however limited, there are some people who argue that they were one and the same. The search for Aztec and Atlantis is a search for the same exact location with merely 2 alternative names. Though this has been heavily disputed, as the legend of Aztec and the legend of Atlantis originated in different places and seem to be different cities entirely. There is a common belief that perhaps the Aztecs were not originally people stemming from Mexican lands, but came from what is now known as the Aztecs, as the western United States, and that they migrated down to the Valley of Mexico, settling there in due time. When it comes to finding Aztlan, there are three main issues that must be addressed. First, there is the problem of stretching. The Aztec civilization most likely would not have migrated directly from Aztlan to the Valley of Mexico, assuming there were other settlements and places they moved to during that stretch of time. As such, they would most likely have zigzagged around the continent. As such, finding the exact traces of where they went and the journey they made it near impossible to accomplish and may always leave us with missing pieces in the puzzle. Secondly, layering. Theories suggest there would have been multiple migrations from north to south, so the travels would have layered over each other. Lastly, folding. They would have traveled from north to south and south to north continuously. As such, the potential of following in their archaeological footsteps is currently merely a fantasy. But who knows? Perhaps we will uncover the secrets of the Aztecs in their entirety someday. Strange infrared light emitting from a pulsar. The cosmos is a thing of awe, horror, and fascination. Space has been the subject of speculation for eons. Among some of the most questioned space-related topics, black holes and neutron stars have to be some of the most popular discussed topics due to how little we truly know about them or how they fit in the larger scheme of the universe. Recently, the Hubble Space Telescope has discovered something unsettling and intriguing. One neutron star has been caught displaying strange swirls of glowing infrared light. When a supernova explodes, it sometimes leaves behind neutron stars. Neutron stars are an estimated 1.4 times denser than our Sun, but only 12.4 miles in diameter. Space.com claims that at such an insane density, a teaspoon would weigh 1 billion tons. Occasionally, neutron stars spin at high speeds and release electromagnetic radiation, such as X-rays. These neutron stars are known as pulsars. RxJ 806.4 to 4124 is the name of the neutron star emitting infrared light, and studying it might help develop our understanding of how neutron stars work. RX and 6 other X-ray pulsars near us, being 3,300 light-years away from Earth, are referred to by astronomers as the Magnificent Seven. The reason why these 7 stars are so extraordinary is that they burn intensely hot, hotter than they logically should, given the available energy at their disposal and their age. They also spin around at a slower rate than most other known pulsars. Bettina Posselt, a lead author of an astrological paper in the Astrophysical Journal, states we observed an extended area of infrared emissions around this neutron star, the total size of which translates into about 200 astronomical units, approximately 18 billion miles at the assumed distance of the pulsar. Never before has a pulsar emitted infrared light, especially with such an insanely large signal. The emission is clearly above what the neutron star itself emits. It doesn't come from the neutron star alone. And though astronomers are frantically coming up with theories and suggestions, nothing can be proven just yet. We will have to observe and hope that we will be able to uncover the secrets of the pulsar RxJ 0806.4-4124. The vanishing of Dr. James McGrogan. 39-year-old Dr. James McGrogan visited the ski resort of the small town of Vail located at the base of the Vail Mountain within the White River National Forest for a weekend getaway vacation trip with 3 of his other friends. It was on Friday, the 14th of March, that Dr. James McGrogan would go missing for a time span of about 2 weeks before his body was recovered on the 3rd of April by a group of young skiers. According to McGrogan's friends, the group went hiking up the Vail Mountain, taking the 9-mile hike to the Iceman Hut at about 8:30 in the morning. After a couple of hours, at about 10 in the morning, the group took a short break at the side of the trail to catch their breath and relax. It was at this point that Dr. James McGrogan told his friends that he would hike on up ahead alone and would meet them all at the Iceman Hut when they were finished relaxing. Several hours later, when the group made it to the Iceman Hut, they noticed that Dr. James McGrogan was nowhere to be found, with a search and rescue team spending the next 2 weeks trying to find him and claiming to have covered more than 18 square miles surrounding the location. The body of Dr. James McGrogan would eventually be found by a group of skiers nearly 4 miles away from the Vail Winter Trail near the Booth Falls area. When experts got to the body, they noticed that McGrogan was not wearing his coat, gloves, or boots. When searching through his materials, the team found that he had been fully equipped in the event of being lost, such as a working cell phone in his backpack in an area with working cellular reception, a large pack of food, water, an extra battery for his cell phone, basic medical supplies, an avalanche beacon, a working GPS, and an extra set of warm clothing. When an autopsy was performed to uncover the cause of death, the details came back showing that Dr. James McGrogan was suffering from multiple injuries, including severe head trauma while wearing a helmet, trauma to the left side of his chest, and a completely broken femur. The cause of his death was immediately ruled as an accident, and no further investigation was taken to explain the strange injuries. The vast amount of distance covered all the fact that Dr. James McGrogan had failed to use any of his safety tools available to him that could have easily helped him at any point during his journey if he had been lost. Unfortunately, many of the rescuers would go on to claim that nothing was unusual with the finding of Dr. James McGrogan, claiming that he had crossed over 4.5 miles in a straight line, crossing over mountains and ridges without any climbing gear, only to fall off another mountain and accrue the injuries in different places all over his body without shoes and while still wearing his helmet. The complete disregard for uncovering the true nature of the death of Dr. James McGrogan has only fueled continued paranoia when it comes to the growing disappearances of national parks and a conspiracy surrounding the missing 411.